I'm going to tell you a little story here to get started today. And if you've been to our field today before, you may have heard it. It used to be my dad's job to tell this story. But as life goes, sometimes we have to make changes. And so I'll tell you the story. So you are sitting, maybe, where my great-grandparents settled in 1939 when Fort Leonard Wood was built. So they moved here because my grandpa wanted a place with some bottom ground. And so he grew watermelons out here in the bottoms. I was sitting down at the cemetery for Memorial Day, and that's one of the stories that one of the guys was telling. I remember when your great-grandpa used to grow watermelons down there. He said they were the best watermelons around, yellow ones. But just west of here, during early settlement times, so back before 1939, my great-great-grandparents moved from Tennessee, and they bought 80 acres. Now, I don't know what land's going for in your area these days, but around here, in early settlement times, you could get 80 acres for a mule and a shotgun. I think times have changed a little bit. And one of those the lady in this couple, my great-great-grandma that settled there was Grandma Corn. That's what my dad used to call her. Matilda Corn was her name. And there's this story about this lady. And this is the story that my dad told, and I've probably heard it 50 times, and so I'll tell it to you. But it parallels our appreciation of native plants, I think. So, great-grandma Corn, again, she came from Tennessee. She had a daughter named Callie. Well, Callie was my dad's aunt. You're like drawing this family tree. Don't get too worried about the family tree in your head. But he said she probably wasn't very big, but he was just a lad, and she was one of those big personalities. So she seemed really big. And whatever Aunt Callie said, went. Now, there was this rumor that would go through the family sometimes that there might be some Indian in our family. And Aunt Callie would inform them in no uncertain terms, there was no Indian in us, we were better than that. My dad could still remember that, even though he was just a little guy when Aunt Callie was alive. Well, fast forward a couple years, I was actually alive by that time. In the 1990s, we found out from the other side of the Hamilton family that there was some Indian in us. As it turns out, great-great-grandma Corn was full-blood Cherokee Choctaw. Well, if you've got the family tree drawn out well in your mind, Aunt Callie that got so mad, she was half. So, to us today, we're like I'm proud of that Native American heritage, right? She obviously was not proud of that. But you think about it, from the 1870s to the 1930s, it was not legal to be an Indian or a Native American in the state of Missouri. Well, yeah, you don't go around saying, hey, we're Indians. Like the culture was different, right? The times were different. And my dad, he thought this was so cool when he found this out, that he started wearing a mohawk. Now imagine this like cowboy guy, long sleeve shirt year round, jeans, he never wore shorts, very conservative guy. He'd pull off his cowboy hat and there's a mohawk on his head. So now he didn't color it up bright, so don't get thinking too crazy of him. But this kind of parallels our story of plants in the United States, in Missouri, if you will. So we have these settlers come over from countries in the old world, right? And they didn't have an appreciation for the people. They didn't know the people. They didn't know their ways. They didn't have an appreciation for the plants. They didn't know those plants. They knew what they had grown up with, right? What they had been taught to use, what their mama taught them to make food out of, what they were taught to make medicine out of. And so did you know, here's a fun quiz question for you, why crabgrass was introduced into the United States? It was as a food for people, is how it was first introduced, as I understand it. And you're like, oh really? It doesn't look all that tasty. The seeds, they're small, but they would gather them. If times were hard, you were better with your crabgrass porridge than you were with nothing. And so it was actually introduced that way. So they knew crabgrass. How many great Native American plants are there that could have served that same function? It doesn't matter, they didn't know them, right? And so we lose a knowledge of it because we have new people come in. And I'm not saying they should have necessarily done different. They were doing the best they could with what they had and what they knew. But today we can sit here and we can look and say, learn from these lessons and say, what way do we want to go now? So if you look around today, you know, evidently my ancestors didn't have much appreciation for the native plants here because they're mostly gone. Now we planted quite a few back, but the ones that would have been here remnant, they're mostly gone. And in fact, what is it, like is it a 0.5% or something of our native prairie that used to cover the US remains? It's probably even worse for our native savannas, the ecosystems with the big trees and the grasslands underneath. So I think today we have this chance to look and say, you know, of course, a lot of our opinions about the native people have changed. You know, we just went to, which one was it? Jamestown, out east in Virginia. And they have a living history thing set up, and they're teaching you how the Native Americans made like fish hooks and, you know, all of these different things. And my boys, they were pretty into this. We have a better appreciation for those ways than people did back then. What about plants? You know, what do we want? How do we want that to look? If we own land, how do we want that to look, if that makes sense? So now that you know just a little bit about me, I'm going to ask you guys some questions. So, you know, in America, you can go vote if you want to. You don't have to vote if you don't want to. Did you know, here's another very useless trivia question for you, that in Peru, you are actually required to go vote. If you don't go vote, they fine you. So this is a Peruvian democracy here. You have to vote, right? I'm probably not really going to fine you, but let's just go with it. Okay, so you can just raise your hands. Let me know who you are. Have you been to, has anybody here been to a field day here before? Okay, a few. Anybody a landowner? Quite a few. How many run cattle? How many run small ruminants, like sheep or goats? There's like 2 lonely people out there. How many run bison? Nobody. One, my brother in the back, he's like, me! So we use the bison as weed control in our wildflower seed production, actually. So that's another fun fact. How many work for the government and like help private landowners on their land? How many have moved to Missouri in the last 5 years? How many are not even from Missouri? Oh my goodness, like half of you are not from Missouri. And 2 last questions. How many have natives that are already on their land? That you planted them, yeah. And how many would like to plant them and they're here to learn about that? Okay. Well, I guess, let's see. A little bit of housekeeping stuff. There is some tick spray back there. If you haven't already tick sprayed down, the pastures are probably going to be pretty wet. So if you want to stay on the trailer, you sure can. If you want to get off the trailer, you can. We're just playing a lot of things by ear today because the weather, it says it's not going to rain until, you know, be clear the rest of the day, but it's got rain scattered all over. So we're just kind of going to watch the radar, do the things that have to be done while we're actually out in the grassland and looking at it. If we get to stay outside all day, that's all the better, but we're just going to play it by ear. So there's porta potties there if anybody needs those before we go get on the trailers. Maybe a while, may not, depending on the weather before we get back. And let me, before I get ahead of myself with all the rest of the housekeeping stuff, let's talk a little bit about what is a diverse native grassland, what are we going to see, and how did we get inspired to do one in the first place, and that sort of thing. So my folks started the seed company back in 1981, and they started raising warm season grasses. And with time, they started to see the wildflowers out there on these native grasslands, and they were like, hey, we should maybe start harvesting those. Those are kind of neat. There became an appreciation for the native wildflowers as far as like wildlife habitat. And of course, their aesthetics. They're pretty sometimes, like beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but you can have really pretty wildflower meadows. And so then fast forward to 2012, well, a few years leading up to that, my mom gets to thinking that, you know, so we have cattle all this time. My dad had cattle ever since he was a little boy. And he's like, hey, we're grazing our warm seasons, and then we have fescue on this side of the fence. And so we've got our warm seasons over here and our cool seasons over here. And so we graze this in the summer and we graze this in the winter. So my mom gets to think, and she's like, no, wait a minute. Why don't we mix these together? And then we can graze every acre in every season. We can graze here because there's warm seasons and cool seasons in both the summer and the winter. And of course we can do that over here too. So she started doing some experiments. She's like, I know cool season grasses, orchard grass and endophyte friendly fescue and, you know, these sort of things. So she goes and she plants those because that's what we think of in agriculture, right? Those are the ones that have become popular in our minds. That's just where our minds go to. She plants those and she's like, well, I know native warm season grasses. They're wonderful. Big blue stem, Indian grass, etc. So she plants those together. We were never really happy with those combos. And I'm not going to say it can't work for you to put those introduced cool seasons with the native warm seasons, but I'm going to say sometimes it sure doesn't. And for us, it did not. So then fast forward to about 2011, we wrote a conservation innovation grant for NRCS. And we were awarded that, and they ended up funding part of the project to convert 60 acres to a diverse native grassland. So we were like, by this time, we're like, hey, you remember those cool seasons? I mean, we're selling cool season grasses that are native, like the wild rye, river oats. We're like, let's mix the native ones with the native warm seasons, and let's put some forbs and legumes out there because we're going to basically recreate a grassland like the bison would have seen. And so we planted that in 2012. It's a drought of 2012, bad drought. That slowed our establishment down. But, you know, basically from there, we keep converting. We've got less and less fescue pastures, and we are in the heart of the fescue belt. Like, fescue is what is predominantly growing around. So I don't know, did we kill our last fescue pasture, Colt? He's not paying attention. Did we kill our last fescue pasture? we got this one little pasture by the barn where my daughter runs her milk goats. So it makes good winter sacrifice pasture. But like 2 acres of fescue is all we've got left at this point. So basically, you know, we have really enjoyed the native warm seasons mixed with the native cool seasons, mixed with the forbs and legumes. And we're going to look at, you know, those different groups of plants, but I kind of want you to get in your mind, when we say a diverse native grassland, we're thinking diverse, not just one species of warm, cool, forb, and legume. We're not talking just 4 species. We're going to mix, you know, 5 or 6 or 7 warms and the same cool and 20 forbs or something like that together, and maybe end up with 40 or 50 species. So that's what we're thinking. We're thinking diverse, native, all of it's native. Now, can we really get an all native grassland when, you know, we had fescue growing there the year before and we've killed it out? It's hard to get rid of the last fescue plant. It's hard to get rid of the clovers. It's hard to get rid of the Queen Anne's lace. This is not a virgin, never been plowed prairie, right? So it's not that there's not native plants out there, but we're not, or non-natives, but we're not putting them in. They're just coming on their own, and we try to manage around it. So diverse and native, and then we're making a grassland out of it. So we're going to see treeless ones. We're going to see ones with trees. So we'll call those savannas or woodlands. And so was there any other inspiration? And there was one other part. About the time that we did this, there was this research project that came out of Minnesota. And they planted these little plots, as researchers do. And they would put like 1 species here, and they would put, I forget, it's like 4 and 8 and 16. They had these different options with different, you know, so this one would just have switchgrass in it. And this one would have switchgrass and, you know, whatever, big blue stem or wild rye, and so on. So, you know, some have 1 species, which includes just switchgrass. Some of them have a real diversity of species out here. well, 16. What they found is that the biomass production, so they were cutting it at the end of the season to make like biofuels out of it, but let's just think of cutting it earlier if we're doing the forage thing, either with a cow, or you can also hay these native warm season grasses, the native grasslands. So they have 16 species. It was 238% more productive in those 16 species than even like the switchgrass. Switchgrass is like biomass king. I mean, you can produce a bunch of tonnage on switchgrass, but 16 species beats it out. And so we're like, hey, yeah, let's go ahead and do this native project where we put all these together. So that's a little bit of the inspiration. Any questions or anything before we head out? If you don't have a water bottle and you want one, we should have some back there, so just grab one. And if you need to go to the porta potty, we'll try not to abandon you before you get out. So, yeah.
Do the native flowers correlate with what they call like a pollinator plot?
Yeah, okay, so that's a good question. There's all these terms anymore around native wildflowers. We can call them wildflowers if we're landscaping with them, right? If we want them to look pretty, we call them wildflowers. The same plants, if we want them for wildlife, we call them forbs. And the forage people tend to call them forbs. But, you know, then as forage people, we're like, oh, legumes, those are really cool plants, right? Because they produce that free nitrogen. So then we split out and we say forbs and legumes, but the word forbs or wildflowers really includes the legumes. And then if you're into pollinators and monarch butterflies and bees and all of that, we call them pollinator plants. So those are all the same exact plants. We could also call them broadleaves. So they're just non-grass plants in the grassland that tend to have pretty flowers. And they're tending to produce seeds and flowers for the pollinators, seeds for the wildlife, that sort of thing. So, okay, well, let's go. We ready to get on trailers? Weather look good?
Yeah, one thing, I'm just going to tell everybody, you really better watch her, because the Hamilton plan is also known to have been run out of Tennessee at night. Watch whatever she says.
This is my mom, Amy, if you wanted to know, and she's the married-in one to the Hamilton family, so.
Call it Silvopasture or woodland that we've converted to where we're growing grass in it. So what this originally was a pretty poor site index for timber. We are on a south-facing slope, so it gets a lot of sunshine. Underneath the vegetation, there is a lot of rock, bare rock showing. Most of the trees that were here when we started to clear are regrowth timber. There's actually rock piles up through here where people used to grow corn and different things in the past. So this is not, you're not looking at like Mark Twain National Forest in some part that hasn't been cleared. This had all been clear cut. There's actually one big savanna tree right over here in the draw. And a savanna tree is easy to spot. It'll look kind of like that. It's got a short stem and a lot of limbs. You take these trees here, and these lower limbs that appear shorter, those have come on since we started to clear it. When they grow thick together, the sun shines up. So everybody grows one thin stalk, makes nice logs, but they grow one thin stalk with a bush on top to collect sunshine. So you can kind of tell your old trees that were here that didn't get logged originally from your younger trees. Another way to kind of tell the age of a woodland is if grapevines are going up the trees, it's all regrowth timber. And while you can tell grapevines live for about 75 years, and they can't climb a tree. They get on a shrub whenever it starts to grow, and they grow with it. So they're not gonna now show up and climb these trees. So if you see grapevines and timber, it's usually less than or around 75-year-old stand of timber. What we did here was we came in and we girdled several trees, and that's why you see the stumps that are tall. Girdle meaning we took a chainsaw, cut a ring around them, and the top part of the tree then is disconnected from roots and they'll die. You can either treat that with a chemical when you cut, or you can just cut 2 bands and they'll die generally either way. So then now those trees have broke off at that cut because it's a weak spot and that's the first place it starts to rot. So you got these tall stumps. We also then came back and we logged some of the better timber out, and we used the type of equipment where they cut the tree down and drag the top and the stump out, or the top and the trunk, the log out all together, and limit down here. And we prefer, you don't have to do that kind of logging, and it does remove the tops. So that's kind of nice if you're going to do a planting, is to get the tops out of there. But the main thing is ground disturbance. You're dealing with a woodland, and as the leaves pile up, they like years worth of shingles. You've got the bottom layer that's 3 years old, you got a 2-year-old layer, and then you got a top layer on top, and each one of those layers overlaps. If you can't get your seed down to mineral soil, then your seeds won't germinate. So you got to get disturbance. So a lot of times we will either burn and then log, or if you're doing the kind of logging where they're going to drag the top and the tree out all together, you get a lot of disturbance from dragging that tree, breaks the leaves up, and then you can get seed soil contact. So we did our logging, and we did our girdling to thin it, and then we planted it. And this is probably 6-7-year-old planting. You can come back through at time if you want and thin the trees more. You can kind of see over here they're thicker than they are up through there, and you will grow less vegetation over here where they're thicker. You know, it's all a competition for sunlight for plants to grow, and the trees being thicker here, you need to graze it less often. You know, you'll grow more grass over here where it's a little more open. The species here and the species on the hillside behind you are virtually the same. The difference is the trees. You'll get more forage production out in the open, but a lot of farms, this is a site where they're not getting any production out of it. So these are easy places to start. Also, we talked to a lot of people like, man, I'd like to plant some fields to natives, but where am I going to run my cows while I'm switching over? Because it does cause you to lose some years of growth where you're killing things and replanting things. Look at your timber sites. A lot of times the logs might pay for the seed, and you don't have to go through all the chemical cleanup. Then you can get yourself some forage in your woodlands to start doing some field work later, kind of give you something back.
Why did you not just take all the trees out and maximize forage production?
Well, I'm not a tree person, so I don't really have an answer for why we didn't. But a lot of it is, grandkids like to squirrel hunt. So we kind of, this part of the Ozarks was savanna. So you had open prairie, and then you had mixed in woodland. And it's kind of a healthy ecosystem. It's an attractive ecosystem. It is very good for wildlife. As far as livestock, a few benefits that I do see. We tend to breed our cows in July so that they calve in April and May. And that's a hot time of year for, a lot of people have trouble getting their cows to breed at that time of year. Savannas are a great place. There's shade everywhere. And this savanna here in particular has a lot of water in it. So I do utilize it in our livestock production, particularly during the breeding season in July and August. Keep the cows comfortable, a lot of shade, good water, and good grass. A lot of the grass in here is big blue stem and little blue stem when you get up the hillside. A lot of this in front of us is eastern gamma grass. Kind of, you're on a little wet bottom. We got water, there's enough rock underneath that today's rain's slowly working its way down and coming back out on top of the ground down here, and then it'll work its way on off down that bottom.
And when was the last time you grazed this?
I have not grazed this particular field at all this year. I burned it back in, probably about February. I did a pretty good hot burn across it, removing the old growth, letting the new growth come on. And again, I'm saving this till probably that July period. To get it ready for the July period though, I will probably run the cattle across to here in the first part of June, so about now, for a really short rotation. I don't want to consume much of it, but I do want to keep it more vegetative. If I wait until August to put them in here, I'll have let things get pretty rank. So I want to take maybe 10 or 15% off, stomp a little bit down, encourage some more growth, and in July and August I'll have really good vegetation for them to eat. And by not removing too much, I'm kind of stockpiling my forage till that time in particular.
So that sequences you burned when and then you broadcasted the seed?
This one here we didn't actually burn because we did the girdling to get kill trees.
Oh, we burned it.
And then we logged it out. And then when we logged it, we would have dragged it's been so a little bit different on our place and other people's places. We burn a lot. So this had been burned even when it was a woodland, before we thinned it.
Okay.
So we didn't probably have 3 years of growth. I as a kid back then, you was probably burning every third year, every second year, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, how did you get rid of the leaf layer?
So when you burn, it's a great question, because when you burn the first time, usually November or somewhere towards spring and February, you get into December, January, the days are too short, you don't get very many good burning days. When you burn, you would generally burn off the top layer, and you will have the second year and the third year underneath. So you can do, if you're early enough and you're taking the first layer out, that second layer starts to dry out. And you can do multiple burns within a year. Now your first burn's your hot one, but that first layer is probably your worst to get rid of. It's the thickest. Your third layer is partially decomposed, but when you get to dragging those tree tops out, the two underneath layers really break up fast. They're kind of stale, dry rotted, let's say, and you can break them down really fast. So, but you do want, and I would encourage it. It seems silly, and most loggers don't like things that seem silly because, they're big loggers and they ain't got time for silly. But if you can get them to take a skidder and just drag a few tops around where they didn't drag out logs, it will really help you get a stand in those places. When we did that hillside over there, which looks a little bit thicker timber, and it's so steep, they log going up and down the hill, and about the only place we got really good stands is where they drug the logs down the hill and created that disturbance. The rest we burned, but we didn't get stands there as we did other places.
Yeah, one thing, we got some land and we're trying to create a savanna, but it's a small area, about an acre. If you want to get rid of the duff, if you have one of those powerful leaf blowers, that'll just be perfect.
Blow it around.
Get the lower duff up.
A lot of people too will do on smaller areas just a four-wheeler with cedar trees. We don't have many anymore. Fire's hard on cedar trees, but there's one there. Cut you an appropriate size cedar tree and just drag it behind your four-wheeler, tractor, anything you have. Less good in the woods, but yeah, because of stumps and trees.
When you were talking about the dragon trees helped with stand establishment, were you broadcasting seed after the timber, or was that native seed bank in the soil?
No, this was planted after the timber was removed. And the way we just broadcast seeded with aerial seeder on a drone is what we did. Yep.
Occasionally, you will thin trees and you will have this great boost of like things come back from the seed bank, or they were a struggling plant and they're like, oh my goodness, I have sunlight now, life is so good. And you will have this beautiful ecosystem come back. In our experience, it's rare. And I think it depends hugely on what the history of the land is, right? And so if it was a dairy farm 60 years ago, like kiss that dream goodbye. But I think that some of the tension there is you got to decide when you're going to do one of these, are you going to seed it or are you going to let it come? Some of the things you can do is you can look at, like areas maybe along the road where there has been more sunlight getting in, and you might get a sense for there's really nothing there, or look at that beautiful vegetation, that's all native. But short of that, in my opinion, you're better off to just go ahead and seed it. And you say, yeah, that's because you work for a seed company. Well, I mean, we like to sell seed, it's true, that's how we make a living. But more importantly than that, you miss your good window of opportunity. Because when you have, if you say, I'm just going to wait and see and then I'm going to seed. Well, in the meantime, it could be that you had a really nice stand come up. Could be that, broom sedge came in, like that's very common to come in a cleared off area. Or it can get worse than that, and you can get perilla mint and every other noxious invasive weed known to man that's not palatable to livestock, if that's your goal, or not that great for wildlife, if that's your goal. And so we're of the persuasion that you've got this window of time. Go ahead and get it seeded. And if you get native stuff to come on, that's all the better.
And on that window of time, we usually try to do our logging in the summer, and then we plant in the winter time. A lot of our forbs need to be planted in the winter, freeze and thaw, so they'll germinate in the spring. So we kind of like to have our logging done by, September, October, and then we can give us a little bit of time to do any burning patches we need to, and then we seed it December, January, somewhere in there. And don't wait too long after you, like she's saying, log. You will have things start to grow, whether they're things you want or not. You will have things start to grow, and you kind of start to get more thatch. And if you don't remove all the tree leaves, you'll get another crop of leaves to fall the next year. But anyways.
Should we do a little bit of functional diversity before you get on to wildlife?
Sure.
Okay, ignore the seed heads in here. They don't belong to these leaves, but this is a warm season grass, native warm season grass. So what we're talking about is mixing all of this stuff up, right? This is eastern gamma grass. It's actually kind of an odd warm season grass in that it has its seed head here during the summer, but most of the native warm season grasses have their seeds at the end of the summer. So, but it's very luscious. The quality is we're still in May. They say there's an old rule of thumb that 4 pounds a gain a day. This is wonderful stuff right now. Okay. There's other warm season grasses. Colt's in some blue stems up there, big blue stem, little blue stem. There'll be some Indian grass scattered through. And so the warm season grasses are harder to see right now, just simply because they don't have their seed heads on except the eastern gamma grass. So then we move on to the native cool season grasses, and technically we go native cool season grasses and grass-like species, but then we get all lazy and we just say native cool season grasses. Because there's some species that are not really grasses, if you want to be a botanist and be all technical about it. But a lot of us look at it and we're like, well, it looks kind of like a grass, has parallel leaves. I'll go for calling it a grass. So some of the most famous might actually be some of the wild rye. And there's not just one wild rye. We actually work with like 5 or 6 of the different wild rye. This one over here is called early wild rye. And this one over here on the left is called Virginia wild rye. And so really great forage producing species. This is one of the grass-like species. It's called nodding bulrush. Kind of has this, it's also called rufous bulrush for the kind of red appearance that it has. But kind of a neat looking heads remind me of fireworks, that has exploded and is going down gently. But nodding bulrush is a native cool season. It's actually a bulrush, but we'll call it a grass. This is a native sedge. Now, some of you are thinking, sedge, I've heard of sedges, broom sedge, or yellow nut sedge. And let's just kind of erase both of those and like restart from the beginning. Broom sedge and this are not very closely related at all. Yellow nut sedge, broom sedge is, like one that shows up in agricultural fields that are kind of poor in nutrition. And then yellow nut sedge is an introduced, most of the species in there are introduced. Anyway, there's multiple species that are involved, but again, not very closely related. These are a genus Carex. Those are something else. And so the sedges are I actually pulled up some leaves on it. They're actually quite leafy. And if you want a real good botany learning experience, there's 200 and some species of sedges in the state of Missouri alone. It's our most diverse genus of plants. And so there's a lot of them to learn. I don't think I actually said which one this one was. This is short sedge. Its heads kind of look like rows of Indian corn. And this is actually a biennial species called wedgegrass. So it comes up one year, makes vegetation, makes green leaves. The next year, like right now, it blooms, it will die. And then it is a disturbance species. These are nature's band-aids. So Colt has collected us up some native legumes and forbs. And again, we can call these forbs, we can call them wildflowers, we can call them pollinator plants. These two happen to be legumes, which is a subgroup of pollinator plants or forbs or wildflowers. This is called lead plant. It's also called buffalo bellow plant or something to that effect, because it blooms at the time that the buffaloes start to do all of their noise making. And like devil's shoestrings, because it pops when they plowed the prairie back in the day. The roots go way deep into the soil and they would pop. Totally useless facts for you. This is a tick trefoil, so one of the desmodiums. These are, both palatable species and wonderful for wildlife. This is Ohio spiderwort. The leaves kind of look like a grass, but we call it a wildflower because it has a pretty flower on it. No pretty flowers today. Has a 3-petaled purple flower on it that is kind of fun. So actually, highly palatable. It's kind of gooey. If you touch the bottom of it, you can often get like some slime off the bottom of it, and you think, what cow wants to eat slime? Yeah, cows want to eat slime. They really seek this out. Purple poppy mallow. This is one of the native wildflower pollinator forb species. And this is one of the native mints. This is a wild bergamot. So if you're a tea drinker, Earl Grey tea does not have this in it, but it has bergamot that's a citrus plant in it, but that smells and tastes like this. So those are some of the wildflowers. And you say, well, why do you have all of these in here? Why not just, one warm season, one cool season? They're each serving a different function in the environment. So the cool season grasses are the first to produce forage, along with, like the spiderwort, acts like a cool season grass. We call it a wildflower, has a pretty flower on it, but it acts like a cool season grass, and it will have these beautiful green leaves that the livestock really seek out there early in the spring. And so basically we're just recreating that grassland and diversity. We're never going to get to the level that a remnant prairie is. You have hundreds of acres of prairie here. We might have 800 species or something on it. 200-300 is pretty darned easy. The more dry, wet, in between habitats we get, the more species we can get. We're not going for 800 species. We're maybe going for 40 or 50, but that's pretty good. Like, that's way better than just 4 species or 1 species. So anything you'd add to all that?
No, I mean, and if you look at how those are growing together, that's the 4 functional diversity groups, the warm season, cool season, forbs, and legumes. They're all growing in amongst each other. And when she said they got 230% more production out of the mixed stands, that's how you're doing that. You got this big gamma grass here, he greens up in about April, with a nodding bulrush that grows out of him that's been growing all winter long. This nodding bulrush is getting ready to go to seed, and then it's going to quit growing all summer and green up again this fall. This gamma grass is going to grow all summer, then it's going to go dormant this fall and not grow all winter until next spring. So basically, you're taking plants with different growth curves, mixing them together, and for the most part, they grow in amongst each other. There's a little competition going on between certain individual plants, but for the most part, one is fading as another one's coming on, and they do this in a cycle throughout the year to give you that more growth through the whole year, adds more tonnage. Also, as you'll get into this a lot more later, is how those plants actually underground help feed each other with the help of mycorrhizal fungi moving stuff around. I think you'll do more on that.
We'll do more on that later, yep.
So as far as wildlife is concerned, the idea of diversity is pretty simple. I mean, what everybody think what their favorite food is? Steak. Huh? Steak? You want to eat it tonight? You want to eat it tomorrow night? You want to eat it every night this year? At some point, you will get to wanting other things. And the reason why is because you are you'll be caught up on the nutrients out of that one thing. You'll get tired of it. You know, apples are pretty good. Apples constantly will wind up giving you gas, and you'll wish you weren't eating that many apples. Better than nothing if that's all you have. Wildlife's the same way. Whether you're a bird that likes to eat bugs, you need bugs throughout the year. If you're a wildlife that likes to eat seeds, you need a variety of seeds throughout the year. If you're the kind that's going to browse like deer, there are some they like awful good. Soybeans, alfalfa, you know, some of these crops they like pretty good, but how do you keep them in, particularly like your soybeans, all year long? They need something in the wintertime. Beans don't grow in the wintertime. Here you've got a diversity of plants for things to browse on, and your livestock and your wildlife work together. I get so many phone calls from people like, I want to do deer. Okay, that's fine. You know, it's a good deal to do deer. Natives are a good way to do deer. But their idea is, I need to fence my deer spot separate from where I'm grazing my cows, because my cows will eat everything and my deer won't have anything. And actually, to me, it's a lot different than that. Your cows come through, they are bigger grazing animals, and they will be less selective. And with management, we make them less selective. We make them polywire them in smaller areas, don't move them. They have to eat what's there. That starts the regrowth of vegetation that your wildlife then, about 2 to 3 weeks after you move the cows out, that's where your deer and stuff start to go to, because that's where the newest growth is at. So as you go through basically clipping your pastures with your livestock, the deer and other wildlife follow that rotation some. Other birds, some of them like the more growthy, growed up vegetation for bugging, for hiding in, that kind of thing. They'll actually be in front of your cows out where it's gotten more growth on it. So wildlife and your grazing can coexist a lot better. That, in my mind, it coexists better together than it does separate. Because when you separate it, there's not anything to really restart the plants. They all just grow to maturity, and then they basically become dormant or stale until their season or cycle's over. Whereas if you come through and cow comes through and bites the top, deer love to eat spiderwort, particularly the seed, just to aggravate me since I try to grow seed. They come through and they'll nip that off. Spiderwort will just put another head up the side. Well, now your deer has 2 spiderwort heads at different times. And same thing with a lot of the forbs. Of course, we know your grass. Everybody that's doing any grazing, you eat your grass and it regrows back. Same thing with a lot of your forbs. Some of the forbs do not. They're kind of a one-shot try, and then they'll just sit there for the rest of the year. But you need that grazing to reset the vegetation for wildlife. Another big thing about wildlife, in my mind, I mean, habitat's easy, structure's easy. We've got quail all over. There's seeds, there's bugs, you know, we've got a lot of wildlife. Deer are not hard to grow. They're kind of everywhere. Squirrels don't really love the tall grass, so squirrels are your thing. They're more of a tree. You'll kill some in these savannas or hunting here, but they like a little thicker woodland than this. So squirrels are particular things. Maybe you should learn to like rabbits. They like this kind of habitat real well. The overlooked wildlife, or we don't consider them the same, are our creeks and our fish and stuff like that. We think, oh, deer, turkey, and then we think of our streams in a whole different relationship, because one, we're growing plants, the other just live in water. And our streams in Missouri are changing quickly. And a lot of that, in my opinion, has to do with the watershed, or like this hillside, anything that's out here is part of the watershed. It rains, gravity still works, so it's all heading for the creek. The big thing on the wildlife in the creek is how quick is that water getting there. And if you are, not anybody that would be here, but let's say you got a neighbor that might be severely overgrazing their pasture, you keep it really short all the time. His root system is really short all the time too below ground, and when it rains it does not soak in much water. And also there's not any growth on top to keep that water from just running off like a parking lot. So then when we get an inch of rain, 1/4 inch soaks into the ground, 3/4 inch is just at a race to get to the creek. We get a little bit of rise in our creek for a day, and then the creek's back down to normal level. That water's all heading downstream. In a healthy system, you've got roots on this hillside probably going 5 feet deep. And when it rains, we can take in probably 2 inches of water. You gonna do that later? I won't ruin the surprise. We can take in a lot of water really fast, and that water then is used some by the plants that are here, but a lot of it is just like you're making coffee in the morning. It's slowly dripping through the grounds, moving downhill. Gravity still works, but now instead of running off the top, it's moving sideways and downwards through the soil to the creeks, and that's where your springs come from. That's where you get those slow, steady. Your creek doesn't rise with the rain and then fall immediately. You may get a rise if you get a lot of rain, but you get more steady flow throughout the year because those little drips of spring water are coming in all the time out of the watershed. So I try to always connect wildlife and the watershed together. That's probably more than you had in mind.
Well, so let's talk about the quail study that they did a little bit. So you can hear quail out here. It's great habitat for quail. My husband will tell you this used to be a fescue field, and he pays attention to those quail. He's got it in his genetics. They used to have all the men would go out and quail hunt on Christmas Day, you know, kind of thing. And so not much use in quail hunting in most of Missouri anymore, but on Christmas Day or any other day. But when we converted this, the quail started, like, we started hearing them over this direction. And so now, is there any evidence to like really back this up, or did we just start paying attention then, right? I mean, that's part of the problem with these anecdotal evidences. Well, there was actually a study, gosh, I guess it's been 10 or 15 years ago, they did in Southwest Missouri. It was a huge study on quail. And they put little radio collars on the quail. And they compared a diverse native grassland that was being grazed and burned. So native plants were grazing it with cattle and burning it. And they compared that to what they thought was the best known quail habitat in the state of Missouri. They would do a bunch of disturbance. They would like have this area fallow, this area they would crop this year. They would have, you know, this thing in this strip and that thing in that strip, and all of these different habitats right beside each other, and they're like, that's where it's at for quail habitat. So they go and they compare these. Well, as it turns out, a diverse native grassland that's being grazed and burned, and that fire and especially the grazing are really important for quail, as it turns out. You get twice as many quail hatched and reared out of the diverse native grasslands that are grazed and burned as you do out of not out of a fescue field. They're not comparing to that. Like, we all know that that's not very good for quail. Out of what they thought was the best known quail habitat. So I don't know how many X better that is than the average overgrazed fescue field, but hugely better, right? But even the other best known stuff, it was twice as good. So quail are nice. I mean, there's a whole hunting heritage around those, right? My grandpa would tell stories about trapping the quail. They were thick enough. We don't need to set out many quail traps today. But also the grassland birds, the rest of the grassland birds, like meadowlarks, they say that 3 out of every 4 meadowlarks has disappeared. Since 1970s, I mean, that's in some of y'all's lives, we've lost like half of our grassland bird population. And so, you know, I mean, quail, at least we can eat them. They're more tangible, right? The benefit to us is a little more tangible. And some people really love to bird. So, I mean, to them, the benefit to having little grassland birds flying around and hearing them is quite tangible. But to the rest of us, it's kind of like that wildlife doesn't pay the bills on the farm, right? We might make an exception for quail, even though they don't pay many bills either. But there's a farmer over here, he says, you know, the wildlife, they can come and go as they wish. Your cows can't. But if the wildlife don't want to stay on your farm, how do you think your cows really like it, right? And so kind of wildlife is an indicator of the health of the land, if you will.
I'm the crazy goat guy is the way people call me these days, mostly just because we got a few thousand head of goats, but we do have cattle too. And
I met up with this crazy girl back in 2009 or something, but we celebrated 15 years just yesterday, or day before yesterday, wasn't it? Somewhere close to that. She's pretty easygoing about it. Lucky, isn't it? Because a lot of times I can't remember. But anyway. Anyway, I did work for the seed business for a couple of years there. We did a lot of out-of-town harvest on native prairies and was involved in the bag ups here at the barns and different things. And I found that my greater interest was in livestock and grazing animals. And and I'd grown up with cattle and horses and some amount of natives even farther north, about 170 miles north of here in a little town called Middletown, Missouri. My dad's a veterinarian there. I think he's been practicing for like 49 years now. He's busy as ever, but anyhow, he's got a cow herd still and on the home farm there. And so we grew up with that and some amount of natives, and had gotten involved in some more management intensive type of grazing before I met my wife, and got down here and learned a whole lot more about native plants than what I knew before, which has been a good thing. And so anyway, that started us down the road, and I decided to break back out and do my own stuff with more grazing animals. I did manage the cattle here at Hamilton's for a short time, and so I've got a few stories from that period of time. And then we got into the goats and still graze cattle and custom graze other people's cattle, and we're spread all the way from the boot heel of Missouri at times to eastern Kansas these days. So we cover a lot of ground with all the places we go. That is what I do for a living, is graze livestock. So that's just a little bit of background there. And so why natives? And I'll just kind of tell you a little, well, I guess, one part of it is just nature as an example. I found that God put things in order with a system that worked pretty good. And man always thinks he can do better. And most of the time we fail at that. And so this is like what we're standing in here is trying to go back. We can never quite go back to what it was, before European man showed up, or, who knows even what the Native Americans did to the landscape when they were here. But it's hard to go back to that, but we're doing our best to put things back in order, kind of the way it was originally designed by our Creator. And so how's it working is one good question. And I got a little story with that. Back when I was working here at Hamilton's and managing their cattle, we had a neighbor down here to the south that had a fescue place there, and we leased it one year, and we took the cows down there and grazed them on that place most of that summer, and we utilized a lot of fescue that year. And just coming to the end of that year there, we had a failed seed crop down here in the bottom of some big blue stem. Wasn't going to make enough seed to be worth harvesting, and it was September, so this is not exactly prime blue stem by that point when it hasn't been grazed at all. But we're going to get the best we can out of that, so we decided we're going to move those cows off of that fescue and put them on that. So her dad Rex and I, we went over and gathered those cattle up, and we're some of those odd people that we don't mind to use some stockmanship, and we're confident we can drive our cattle. And so we may drive our cattle 5 miles down the road at times, 5-6 miles, and avoid the trailer. And it's kind of fun for the cattle and fun for the family, and it's good for everything involved most of the time, and usually works really good. It's a pretty low stress deal, a lot less stress on the animals than hauling them. So we go and gather them up one morning, about daylight. We're there, we gather them up. This is in September. It's like 70 degrees. We walk them, 3 or 4 miles to get to this pasture over here. And when them cows got there, and this was a slow, gentle walk, everything went great. And they got to that pasture, and several of them cows, they got their old tongue hanging out, the slobbers are running out of their mouth, and they're just they're hot. And I thought, man, it's not that hot. and these cows are really acting like it's hot. And the fescue is what was causing that, the endophyte specifically, that's in our Kentucky 31 tall fescue. And so that kind of really changed my perspective on it a little bit. You know, I always knew that, yeah, we know that there's an issue with that, but it's not really that big a deal, I don't think. But that changed my perspective quite a bit. That little illustration did. And so I realized how much difference that was making. And add to that, in 2014, we'd grazed that fescue in that summer, and we had a 64% breed up. Now, keep in mind too that we do breed, and we usually turn the bulls in 4th of July. So if you're gonna graze a lot of fescue, I don't know that I would recommend that method. I'll kind of get through that here in a little bit, but anyway, so that's our breeding season, because we want to be true spring calvers instead of winter calvers like a lot of folks that claim spring calving. So then we fast forward to 2015. We didn't have that place leased, didn't need as much seed. We pulled some fields out of seed production, grazed natives almost entirely that summer. So that summer, this is the same set of cattle. I was the guy managing them, basically the same methods. I didn't change anything. We were rotationally grazing, you know, moving them periodically quite a bit both summers. Just changed the forage was basically the only thing that changed. When we did our preg check that fall, we got 97% on the breed up. And you know, there's a few advariances in there. I don't know that you would always see that huge of a difference, but anyway, that was a real eye opener there as well, because we really did not change much of anything else from one year to the next. And that year we also weaned a 72-pound heavier calf, and when we weighed our calves at weaning, and so that was a pretty big deal. And so just to do a little bit of quick math on that. Say if you had 100 head herd here, and this is, you know, quick cowboy math, you know, we're going to stay out of the weeds of the details. There'll be a few details in here that aren't included, but same management, everything. We got a 72-pound heavier calf. You know, today, in 2014, we thought cattle were high in 2014, but today that's quite a bit better. I kind of redid these numbers this morning. So if we got 100 calves out of that, I realize you got 100 cows. You probably didn't get 100 calves, but I'm getting back to that. This is cowboy math here. That's extra 70 pounds per calf. What's a 5-weight calf worth these days? Anybody want to throw out a number? $5. I'd say that's pretty close. I looked at the Joplin market report this morning, and that's what I used for my math. $5. 70 pounds, that's $350. On 100 calves, that's $35,000. I don't know about you guys, but I can tell when I get an extra $35,000 in my account. And so then, like I said, we saw like a 30-some% breed up increase. I'm not sure I really feel like I can use all that, but let's just say we could get a 10% better breed up. I don't know exactly what that's worth. I threw a little bit of numbers at it this morning and said that's probably worth like $15,000 anyway right now on our 100 cow herd. So added together, we're looking at $50,000. That's a pretty good increase, you know, and that didn't cost anything other than, I mean, it cost something if you had to switch your forage over and you had to establish it, but it didn't cost anything and other inputs than that. And you know, that wasn't fertilizer, that wasn't whatever you could buy in a jug or from the feed man to get that. That was just a forage change, and that's it. The management was the same. So, and this was along in that same time frame, you know, over 10 years ago. Dr. Craig Roberts out of Mizzou, he said that fescue toxicity was costing Missouri like $200 million a year. So if it cost $200 million then, I don't know what the number is now, but it's probably a lot higher. Everything seems to have gotten higher. And he had a higher number on the calf. He said it cost us 112 pounds per calf. Just to throw something out there. And then about the same time, I saw some figures out of Drover's magazine that said it cost the nation $1.8 billion. Those numbers are so big, I can't really. 1.8 billion don't really register. I guess if you're Elon Musk, that means more to you. But for me, it's just a huge number for the nation of what that's costing us in the fescue. The endophyte in the fescue that's costing that problem. So we've done some conversion payback, and there's a worksheet on that they've got back there at the office, or I think they got some laid out that you all can pick up if you want. I won't get into the weeds of all the details of the numbers, but they showed a 1.4 year payback to convert from fescue to natives, based off of increases in their performance.
And that was based on cattle prices quite a few years ago. And the seed prices may have went up some, but they haven't went up nearly as much as cattle prices have.
They're just wishing that the seed prices would have gone up that much.
You okay?
You guys aren't, but they are, So then a little bit of production thoughts here. So in the average, when they planted that, the original DNG they planted, it's over the next ridge over there. This is a little bit newer one over on this hill, but the original one they'd planted, they showed a 194% production of fescue. The neighboring fescue field that was right next to it, under similar management. It's not always the same because one's a cool season field and one's a warm, diverse native field. It's a little different, but as close as, we rotated when it was appropriate. And through those 3 to 7 years, we had 194% production. So that's almost twice, 6% off of twice. It's kind of like having another farm, isn't it? What's land cost? Anybody want to throw out what land's costing them around them? You probably haven't sold your farm, but how much? 5,000 an acre is what he says. Yeah, I heard a realtor down here just the other day say somewhere in that class around 5,000. My dad's country up there, it's more like 8 to 10 where he's at. We're talking some real money. If you can gain that by not having to buy the neighbor's farm at 5 or 10,000 an acre, this is worth a lot of money. So just something to keep in mind on that. Also, the Tillman study that she was talking about earlier, where they planted the different species up in Minnesota, that was 238% that they saw. So in those, when we kept track from years 3 to 7, we didn't quite achieve what they did, but we got relatively close. Another thing that happens is I think there's some options that present themselves when you've got forage like this. Is if you think of the Flint Hills in Kansas, thousands of stocker cattle flow to the Flint Hills every spring in April and 1st of May or so, and they graze them out there until July or something like that, and they put on 2.5 pounds a day, nothing but the grass. And so we generally can't do that with our fescue if all we feed them is fescue. There are folks that are doing stockers on fescue, but I've noticed most of those places I see a bunch of troughs out there in the field, and they go out there and hit them with some feed about once a day, and that helps out a lot. And I'm not dissing that system. People got to figure out what works. So I'm not talking down about what they do, because they have found something that seems to be working for them, but we can do it without the feed truck and just the forage. Those cattle do very, very well, and they won't stand in the shade near as bad. They won't stand in the ponds near as bad. They'll shed off better because they don't have that drag on them from the endophyte in that fescue. So it just opens up some opportunities, I feel like, and I have some experience in that. I lease about 1,900 acres of land from the state in southwest Missouri that we graze a lot of stocker cattle on. I've actually got less on it this year just because of the way the markets are. I custom graze for other people, and cattle are so high that a lot of people got nervous about buying stocker calves, and so we've got a lot of bred heifers out there this time, a little heavier calf, trying to hit a different market. But so we're grazing about 500 head of cattle out there right now, and I typically see about a 1.8 to slightly over 2 pounds a day gain on those cattle, on the stocker calves, when we put like 5 weight calves out there. Depends on the cattle. Got one guy that I've grazed for years, and his cattle are a little better genetics than everybody else, and they will every time beat everybody else's cattle on their gain. They'll do just a little over 2 pounds. And so your genetics does make some difference, and that he's focused on grass type cattle for a long time. I probably ought to talk about these cattle since they're standing here where we can all look at them for a moment. So what Hamiltons have focused on is kind of a smaller framed, thrifty kind of cow that's got quite a bit of heat tolerance. There's quite a bit of Mashona blood in these cattle. I don't know if anybody here knows what those are, but it's an African breed. It's not a Bos Indicus breed. It's not the eared cattle that we talk about. They are Bos Taurus, but they have a really good hair coat on them. And we bought 3 or 4 bulls from Jim Elizondo out of Florida back at the time when I was managing these cattle, and we bought those bulls sight unseen and just had them shipped up here. And anyway, they were the slickest herd cattle I have ever seen. And I will say that on a cold day when it's, raining, freezing rain, drizzling in the winter, they look like all 4 feet would fit in a coffee cup. A little humped up. They didn't like it. But at about the half blood rate, we liked them pretty good. They seem to tolerate winter at that point, and they're docile. And Hamiltons have focused for a long time on docility in their cattle that aren't real high-headed and getting worked up, so they can do things with them and rotate them, move them around, and don't have to worry about them killing you. Short story to go with that, just because it's entertaining, is my wife, before she was my wife, we were dating at the time, and I grew up with cattle a little different. And I've learned a lot from Bud Williams since then on how to handle cattle, but we were using the Bud Light method mostly, and we weren't afraid to use a hot shot and whatever we needed to do to make things happen. And anyway, we almost took pride in having cattle that were nuts, and we had some. They were kind of man eaters, and anyway, we had the cows down there calving one day. My wife come with me, and we were tagging calves, which I've since decided is mostly a waste of time, but at the time we were still tagging calves and trying to match them up to their mother. And anyway, there was a calf out there, and we're going to tag this, and my wife sees it, and she goes over and just sits down on the calf so that he can't get up. And I was like, and that luckily that calf didn't, if he would have given one blah, the whole herd would have come over and tried to run us over. And anyway, he didn't, and I tagged the calf, and I'm like, what are you doing? I'm like, don't do that. She's like, what do you mean? That's how, that's how we do it. I'm like, well, don't do it with my cows, because you'll get killed. I'm like, some of these things are mean, you want to slip up on them and hope they didn't hardly see you, and, snap that tag in them and get away from them. So that was her introduction to cattle that aren't as docile as these are. They don't feed any hay. Hey, these cows, I don't know how long it's been at this point. I'll get your question in just a second. Since they fed any hay to these cows, they do graze them year round. There are some reasons for that within the seed business here. They do not like to bring in hay, and they don't like to bale their own either. And so when you bring in hay, though, you oftentimes are bringing weeds or something you didn't want, and so there's some things that cause that. Oftentimes I think it is profitable to feed hay. I am much more questionable on whether it's profitable to make your own hay for most people, but I think feeding some hay is probably a fine idea for most people because it can adjust your stocking rate up, but it's probably worth buying that hay from someone else. But they have not. So just proof to everyone here that you can have a successful livestock operation for 35 years. How long has it been since these cows had any hay? A long time. And they seem to be doing just fine.
Well, the kids have kind of messed things up. They feed more hay than the rest of us.
Well, to the bison. I don't know that any of these cows still haven't seen it. You did have a question.
So what is that breed? You got Angus still?
There was kind of a red Angus base in there mostly, a little bit of Hereford still. So they're a little bit mixed up with a few things, and then we brought that Mashona in, and so we tried to hold that Mashona at around the 50% mark. So that's kind of roughly what they were. There sure could be. Say that again.
The difference? You say they're shorter, but what's the difference?
Don't think there's any old cows left that are before the Mashona. So a lot of your older ones will be half Mashona. And then some of the younger ones will actually be quarter. We keep our own bulls, so some are quarter, some of the younger are half. It's just, but everything here should be half Mashona or quarter Mashona.
They are spring calvers, so these cows, there's a lot of people that think they're spring calvers, and you ask them about it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm a spring calver. When do you calve?" "Oh, January, February." We have had some warm winters. Maybe you call that spring, but I usually still think that's winter. But the April, May time frame is when these cows calve, so they are truly a spring calver. Which, again, as I said earlier, that puts your breeding season in July and August, which I've seen very few producers that are able to make that work on fescue. I do know one guy over here at Hartville that's been pretty successful, very successful actually, doing that, and he runs mostly South Pole cattle, so he's looking for another breed with quite a bit of heat tolerance. And then he's an exceptional manager of pasture. His pastures, I say they're fescue, he definitely has a lot of fescue base in it, but they're pretty diverse for fescue. So if you are basing your operation mostly off of fescue, it's hard to breed at that time and make it work. It's there's a lot of people doing fall, or they go ahead and calve them a little earlier, in that February, March time frame, so that they can get their breeding to happen at a time when it works. Fly control on these cattle, they really don't do anything other than move the cattle. Not big into putting pour-ons on them or worming them. Very seldom does anything get wormed. And so just the moving them around will stay ahead of most of the flies. There are times when flies will catch up a little bit, and that's just part of it. They gotta cope with it. Looking for a cow that's pretty easy fleshing, thrifty, smaller framed, and can do good on grass and adapted to the environment. So that's just a little bit about the cows themselves here at Hamilton's. And to go with that, I guess, I custom graze for other folks a lot, and I've got my own set of cows that the majority of their genetics came from these cows, and they're over here just a couple ridges over on a place that I lease, on some grass kind of like this, on some natives that we planted on a lease place at this moment, but we still graze a lot of fescue with them, just because that's what we have in our lease places and whatnot. But in custom grazing cattle, I've got to see a lot of different cattle, and that is one thing that I have noticed is most cattle do not have the heat tolerance that they really need to have for this part of the country. CAB, Certified Angus Beef, is the best marketer there is in the world, I think. They are very good at their marketing and have done an exceptional job of marketing black cattle. And nothing against black cattle, other than I have noticed, really it doesn't matter if they're red, and the red ones too, they do not really have enough heat tolerance in this part of the country. They'll do all right, but I mean the heat stresses them. They are looking for some shade, and that's something I think it would be, we can improve that with our forage, and then we could also improve that with our genetics, but you do have to work around the markets and what the markets demand, and black cattle are worth more a lot of the time. Management here, I haven't really got into that, but some sort of rotation is going to be required if you're going to have native forages and be very successful in the long term. There's all sorts of different names, MIG grazing, rotational grazing, amp grazing, I don't know, that's the word of the day, I think. Mob grazing, there's hundreds of them, it seems like. Probably not that many, but a lot. I don't care what you call it, but I am going to say that you're going to need to do some amount of rotation. If you try to continuous graze on natives, in the long term, you will probably not wind up being very happy, because a lot of it, they will graze it out. You'll wind up back at fescue. Fescue will start to encroach, and that's what you'll end up with, because fescue does tolerate that type of grazing better. I'm not saying it likes that type of grazing, but it will tolerate it. Whereas the natives, they're pretty tough. We can do some things that aren't that great to them, and they'll still survive. They'll come back. I don't want to make them sound like they're terribly fragile. They're not, but we do need to give them some management. So some sort of rotation. That doesn't mean you have to move them every day or 6 times a day. Very few of us are going to be successful at a 6 times a day move. But you know, a 1 to 5 day move is great. You can go over that sometimes and be just fine. You have to figure out what fits into your life and the rest of what you've got going, what's going to work for you. The big thing is do you want the plant to be recovered. Whenever you graze this thing off, your cow comes along. When a cow grazes, they stick their tongue out, wrap it around a bunch of stuff, and bite it off, you know. And you really can't see that very good, but I kind of took off, you know, the top third of that plant. That's pretty ideal. We can take them down a little lower sometimes. That's fine. Just let the plant recover before you come back. And you want to say, well, what's that? What's recovered? It's a good question. It's a little, sometimes it's more art than it is science. You know, you'll kind of figure it out. Anyway, for someone who's starting out and hasn't done any rotational grazing before, on natives in particular, sometimes we say 45 days, but I can tell you that in the spring conditions, 45 days is oftentimes too long. That is something I've seen from people, and I've done it myself. It's easy to do. You can easily let these forages get ranker and start to lose quality, and you be unhappy with what performance you're getting if you let them get too big. So that can be a concern, but at least you're not hurting the forage at that point. You know, you can adjust that and figure out where you need to be. So it's a moving target, and sometimes, you know, you may be able to come back in 2 or 3 weeks time, depending on how light that graze was, severe that graze was. It can be very short, and there are other times if it's really dry and things are growing really slow, it may be a long time. You may be 60 days, 80 days before you need to come back. It changes. It's a moving target. So keep that in mind. What happens when a plant gets grazed? And what happens you can see what happens on the surface, you know, when we bite off the top of this, well, the top part of the plant is gone, right? It turned into that cow pie out here somewhere, fertilizer. But that's sort of the same thing happens underground. Some of the roots die back. And the more the top that gets grazed off, the more the roots that die back. And you want to think, well, that's terrible. We don't want the roots to die back. Well, no, it's really not terrible. It's all right. We don't want too much of the roots to die back. That's when we start limiting our production, because it takes too long for that plant to recover. But if some of the roots die back, that's a great thing, because that's what built the prairie soils. Because when those roots die back, I mean, we build them from the top a little bit with the manure and the residue that gets knocked down, but a lot of that actually gets built from the bottom on the roots. When that root dies back, that creates organic material as well down there in the soil. And that's, like I said, that's a fine thing. So we don't mind for that to happen. We just want it to be recovered before we come back. Oftentimes these days you hear about the intensity, or, you know, how much pounds per acre. I don't know if everybody understands that, but I'll kind of run through that real quick. I'm not real big on what that needs to be. I'm just going to say it's expressed in pounds of live animal per acre. So if we have 100,000 pound cows, very few people have 1,000 pound cows. These are probably pretty close. Most cows are much larger than that, but anyway, if we have 100,000 pound cows in a herd, we've got 100,000 pounds of live animal there. So if we allot them 1 acre today, then we have 100,000 pounds per acre of live weight on that acre. That's pretty high stock density if you do that. Most of us run at a lighter stock density than that. But anyway, if you put them on 2 acres, then it would be 50,000 pounds. But I'm just kind of talking about that a little bit, just so you know what it means. I don't know, these are stocked very loosely in here. I don't know, I have no idea how many acres they are on, but.
We give them about 3, and we moved them in here this morning, and they'll stay in here till Monday morning.
Okay, so, and there's, I don't know how many cows is in
30's easier math than the other. Go 20, some of them are kids.
Okay, so he's saying there's like 20,000 pounds on 3 acres. We're less than 10,000 pounds per acre. It's a pretty light intensity. Nothing wrong with that. It's whatever works for your situation.
When are you gonna move them back in here? So if they stay till next Monday or something?
We'll probably stay in here till Monday, then we'll move them over there where you guys are at, and I will probably be back here in another 30, 45 days to graze it again. My goal at this time of the year, management wise, I like to call it random management, because you can't do that wrong, so I try for random management. But it is important when you have a diversity of plants, don't manage each field the same way year after year after year, or you will slowly lose your diversity. And the plants that the livestock like the best at the time of the year that you're always there, you will lose those. So you'll wind up with the less desirable ones. So like for what I'm trying to do, this wild rye is pollinating and going to go to seed, and I want it to make seed. So if I graze hard, I will get them to eat it. They're naturally going to shy away from it this time of year. They would have loved it in April, but they're not going to love it now. This big blue stem's in the prime. They're going to go around and eat this. What I want to do is probably remove half of the total pounds from this field, forage, move on fast, put weight on them. My breeding season's coming up, like we say here in July. So we're June and then July. So they're calving, get the weight on them, get them bred back. And then whenever we start hitting later part of July, I'll be over here in the savannas when it's hot, and then we'll start tightening our rotation up out here in the field, because we're going to start getting less growth because we're getting less rainfall. So I'll start tightening it up, trying to keep things more vegetative and take off more. Right now, just graze cows. It's easy time of year. Put weight on them.
So when you make the decision to move them somewhere else, you go by how the forage looks like at that moment? Okay.
Yeah, and it's not all just like about a uniform. So today I noticed it kind of actually is odd to me. They are eating Mac sunflower. I just put them in here. Me and Amber moved them in here this morning at about, let's say, 9 o'clock. So they haven't been in there very long. They've chose this to eat. Some years they rarely eat this plant at all, particularly in the spring. Sometimes they wait till it blooms in the fall and they eat it. It's all about what they're kind of wanting, self-medication, things like that. They're going to choose what they're going to take out. I'm going to be back 30 days. They may eat entirely different species 30 days from now. I mean, Big Blue's always good when it's in its prime. So they're going to eat it both times. But which forbs do they eat? Which cool season grasses will change through the year.
And that will change. It'll not only change through the year, but it'll change from year to year. And I don't claim to understand why animals pick what they pick. They know more than I do. I'm clear on that part. There's a guy out in Utah State by the name of Fred Provenza, and he spent a lot of time studying the plant secondary compounds in different plants. And he knows a lot more than I do, but I think he probably would be happy to tell you that there's a whole lot that he doesn't know either. They pick what they need, and I am a pretty big believer in that they will figure out what they need if you give them the option. And that's the beauty of this diverse native grassland like this that has all these different things out here, is they get to pick. And one year, this was in a field out in southwest Missouri. We put our stocker calves in there, and these were a put together bunch of stocker cattle out of the sale barn. Not my cattle, I didn't own them, I was custom grazing them, but they're like 5-weight steers. And this particular field, part of it, like a third of it, it was a planting, native planting, some of that we graze is native prairie, but this was a native planting, and it was really heavy to a plant we call white beard tongue, which is kind of on its tail end of blooming right now. I don't see one out here right off, but anyway, it's a white blooming forb, and oftentimes cattle don't eat that very well. One year, that's the only time I've seen it. I mean, they always eat a few of them, they'll pick a few, but they like ate almost all of them. I have no idea what was in that plant that year that they wanted so bad, but they ate the vast majority. This is the plant, Penstemon digitalis. I don't know hardly any Latin names, but I know that one, so I can look smart. So you can see it's right on its tail end, but they didn't eat the entire plant, but they took the top off of them, took that bloom off. I have not seen that happen again. I've got cattle on that same pasture again this year, and anyway, there was a one-time deal that I saw it so far. Why they decided to eat all of those, I have no clue. I assume it was serving a need that they had. And there's another thing with cattle on the difference is cattle have culture, just like people. So I always like to use the example, my wife says I'm picky. I like to think I'm not that picky, but she says I am. But anyway, I will go that to some degree. I'm sure I have some pickiness. If you drop meat off in Beijing tomorrow, I might have a hard time finding anything that I think is all that good in China. I like to make fun of the Chinese restaurants and whatever. It's not my favorite place to pick to eat, but anyway, I might have trouble. They probably have fine food in reality. The Chinese people seem to be living on it. But I do just fine if you put me here in America and I can stop and get a steak or a hamburger or whatever. I like it. And cattle are like that too. All animals, best I can tell. Whatever environment they grew up in, they'll have their preferences. That can be affected by increasing that density of cattle. Like when you start putting more and more cattle together tighter, that encourages them to try other things because everybody's right, when the neighbor's like right here and you're like, well, if I don't eat it, they're going to, then they start choosing to pick other things and they will learn to eat other plants by that. Hamilton's cattle, I think, are an example of cattle that they've been around so many different things here in the seed company. They probably are the least picky cattle that you could find, it would be my guess. They've tried it all. They've had a chance, and they've been run at high densities at times, and oftentimes not, but they have been run at high density and lots of different opportunities for them. But not all cattle are like that. So keep that in mind. If you plant a diverse thing, they may need to learn to eat some of those plants. There's a lady by the name of Kathy Vogt that developed a technique she calls, cows eat weeds. Some of y'all may have heard of this. And she basically teaches these cattle with different feed stuffs. She'll get these black tubs or whatever and goes out there and goes down to the feed store and gets, 6 or 8 different feeds that are novel they've never had before, and she'll feed them a little bit of these in these black tubs, for a few days and kind of gets them to try new stuff. And then she starts mixing in a target plant, whether that's thistle or if they, whatever that plant might be, blackberry, I don't know, something that you want them to eat that's in your pasture that they're not. She'll put some of that in the black tub, and she can successfully teach cattle to eat weeds. I've not tried it myself, but I think it is a technique that probably works, even though I haven't actually done it. But it illustrates that culture of the cattle. That timing that he was talking about, I'm just going to reference that. He pretty well explained it, but one thing that can happen is you have the calving pasture, like every year we're going to calve in that pasture. That's what gets you into those kind of ruts where you're always in the same place at the same time. And that like as he said, that will cause you to lose your diversity in that area. If you've got a diverse pasture, they will pick something that they like the best at that time of year, and you'll lose that plant or severely decrease it. So that's adaptive management is kind of what I like to call what you do, because you're always adapting to weather conditions. Every year is different, and what you see on the ground. There are some emerging technologies. I have not gotten any of this virtual fence yet. I'm about ready to try it, but I don't have it yet. And we've done a lot with polywires. They can really, you can be very creative with the polywire. I think I can be even a little bit more creative with the virtual fence and the collars. Yeah, it'll do a labor decrease. It comes with an expense. The numbers I've run across it, I'm not sure that it will pay for itself based off of the labor and the expense of electric fence. Electric fence is cheap, like relatively. I mean, you might think it's sort of expensive, but in the big scheme of things, if you buy $5,000 worth of electric fence material, like you can do a lot of stuff with that. Virtual fence comes with quite a bit of cost, decreases labor. I don't think it'll pay for it with labor, but I think in my own operation, I suspect it might pay for itself because a lot of times I get there, I've got a lot of, you probably figured that out when I told you I had several thousand goats and we operate across, this 350-mile stretch. I've got people working for me, otherwise we couldn't do that. But nonetheless, especially if I'm the guy moving the cows, I get there just a little late a lot of times. And I think, sometimes we would get things done more timely. You have to keep that in mind. Whatever management style you pick, or technology that you choose to use, make sure it fits your lifestyle well enough that you can get it done when it needs to be done. Otherwise, maybe you need to decrease that intensity, that stock density a little bit. There's nothing that magic about really high stock densities all the time. And that can be a tool that's, used at times and not used at others as well, depending on what you're trying to accomplish on the land at that time. I think I've hit most of what I had on my list here. Something that has helped us a lot is there's a company called Ranch Management Consultants, which runs the Ranching for Profit School. I just always throw out a handful of things that I think are really helpful to farmers and ranchers. They put on a very good school. It's like a 5-day school. I think they've decreased it just a little bit from what it used to be on the length of time, but I don't know what it currently costs, and everybody looks at it and it's several $1,000s in a week of your time. I think, well, it's too expensive. I'm going to tell you right now, that is the cheapest thing you can do. Continuing education, I'm going to put a plug in for any type of continuing education, and I'm glad everybody that showed up here today, this is continuing education of some sort. I hope it's good. Anyway, usually continuing education is one of the cheapest things you can do, is go learn from somebody else. If it prevents mistakes on you or gives you, that you don't have to make, or gives you ideas, they will return hundreds of times over, thousands maybe. You can go to one of these schools and learn something that one trade on livestock vastly pays for it, and you have that information for the rest of your life. So I advise everybody to go to continuing education opportunities when they arise. We are involved in the Top of the Ozarks grazing group, and we have a pasture walk here in this general area here in the Ozarks. We range out a bit, but about once a month through most of the year, the growing part of the season anyway. There's lots of books out there on different things. Stockmanship has been something I've been very interested in. I don't know that I claim to be an outstanding stockman, but I sure learned a lot. When I told you that I wasn't afraid to use hot shots, and that's how we grew up. I mean, if it didn't sound like bacon frying when we were working cattle, we didn't think it was right. And now I'm appalled by that now, but I'm not proud of that, but that is how we operated, and it was not a good method in my opinion at this point. But I went to a school with Bud Williams in 2008. It was 3 days with Bud. They called it marketing and stockmanship. It was half marketing and half stockmanship, and the stockmanship was the part I was really interested in. And I'm finally catching on to the marketing side, and both of them are very valuable, and they work hand in hand. But we got to where we can do things with cattle, and it makes this rotation much easier if you understand how to talk to your cows. And they are very willing animals to do what you want if you ask them in the proper way. It's very valuable. So Bud has passed away. His widow still lives over here at Bolivar, Missouri. And his daughter Tina is still doing some teaching. There's another one that spent a lot of time with Bud by the name of Dawn Notto, and she is doing quite a bit of teaching. She lives down in Texas now. But anyway, I would highly recommend a stockmanship course from somebody that is good. Most of the people I knew that were good have retired, other than Dawn. And Tina is still doing a little bit of teaching. Her and Richard were doing some teaching, but Richard passed away in April. So anyway, one of those things that is very valuable, I think. It will make your grazing easier to implement if you understand some stockmanship principles. What else have I forgotten, or what questions do people have? This guy's got one. Well, okay, whoever.
So on the native warm seasons, I don't graze any. What do you look for? Do you appreciate any trample, or do you look for any trample? Right now I don't run any native warm seasons, but I got a really diverse pasture, and I move on a daily basis, and I'm stocking probably 40,000 pounds. And I'm looking for about a third graze, third trample, and a third leak. And I've been 5 years on that, and I love the results of it. And what I'm wanting to do is work into some native warm seasons.
So to me, it's different times of the year.
Yep.
Because this is 365 days we have green growing grass. Right now, this time of year, if you don't have grass, it's going to get worse. I do not care how much they knock down right now. I've got grass everywhere, and I don't mind the knockdown at all. Particularly, get the mud, it'll start to decompose. So I do like the knockdown now. Then through the summer, when we get into July and August, we've still got a lot of grass, but the growth is happening less rapid. So it's not really stockpile because it's not winter, but it is the spring growth, the summer growth. We're getting dry. I want to knock less of it down and start utilizing more of it. And so I tighten them up a little bit is the way I do that. Then when we get through into September, I start moving usually a little faster again, and I want my native warm seasons to regrow before they go dormant, because I won't have enough cool season grass to eat all by itself. So I'm going to eat that warm season through the winter, even though it's dormant, with a little cool season mixed in. And to do that, I need it to be standing up, because what cool seasons do well is they will grow right out of that clump of big blue stem in the winter through those dead leaves, and their mouth is that wide. If they want to eat that green, which they do, they will eat the brown with it. So then I start moving very quickly and eat some brown, eat some green, move on, and then that green will regrow. A lot of times within 30 to 45 days I'll be back again, and I will graze through there, eat a little green, a little more brown, and move on. And that's how I do my winter rotation. So I want less knockdown in the winter, more and less in the late summer, early fall, late summer. But this time of year, not worried about it at all.
How did you establish this pasture? How did you establish that particular pasture?
So establishment of this was a fescue field, fescue orchard grass, clover, that we were grazing it, strip grazing it. We decided to turn it into natives. Again, they're going to trick me with the years because it's easy and they like low-hanging, easy fruit.
Doesn't matter what field.
So it's probably been 7-8 years ago on this field. We decided to convert it over. So we come in about September. We want the fall rains to start. We come in, sprayed it with glyphosate or Roundup to kill the permanent plants that are there. This was done with an establishment method we call the split establishment. We don't plant all the plants at once. And why we do that is the native warm season grasses are tolerant to an herbicide that helps us establish. So crabgrass, ragweed, and foxtail are not tolerant to the herbicide of Panoramic. So in August, we kill everything out. We want the fall rains so that our grass starts to grow. Then we kill it. We grew a cover crop on it that fall. Then we came in and planted.
Which was the cover crop?
On this one, we planted a lot of millet, and a lot of times we'll do millet, turnips, and then we actually graze that winter before we do our seeding usually. So killed everything, plant a cover crop that fall, graze that cover crop, scattered our seed in the late winter, early spring. We come in right before that seed germinates, so let's say late March, and we spray Roundup mixed with that other chemical called Panoramic, so glyphosate and Panoramic. And the Panoramic's going to act like a pre-emergent to keep ragweed, crabgrass, and foxtail out. Your native warm seasons for the most part are immune to it, so they come on, we get a stand of those. Then we came in, if you do really, really good that year getting a stand, you might get some grazing on it in the fall the first year. Don't count on it. A lot of times it won't take that quick. You got to build that root system. They may establish slower, but if the rain's good, you might get some grass. That fall, we come in after frost. The native warm seasons will go dormant. So we could come in one last time and spray glyphosate again to kill any fescue, orchard grass, clover that's germinated with our seed. Then that winter we go ahead and put a diversity of forbs in and our cool season grasses. So then after you do that, you're kind of hands off on the herbicide side.
Just broadcast on top of it.
Just broadcast on top. If I got a really good stand the first year, I might burn it to get that seed to soil contact. I've also don't mind dragging it. A lot of times we just drag a tree behind the tractor again to kind of rough up that layer, get the seed down through any thatch that there is.
The seeding rate for the native grasses was about what, 8 to 10 pounds an acre?
The seeding rates?
Yeah.
The cool seasons on a full stand are about 25. The warm seasons are about your 8, 10, 12.
Okay.
The forbs, some of them, they range all the way from half a pound an acre to a lot. The mixtures, when you do 30 species, we do a lot of different custom mixes and things, but generally you will plant more than 100% seeding rate in combination because they overlap. That rye will grow in a monoculture stand, that big blue will grow in a monoculture stand, but when you put them together, they will grow on top of each other. They aren't even green for the most part the same time of the year, so they're not in competition. So you have to increase what we would call a monoculture full stand to get, so we actually plant about 200% seeding rate because we're growing different times of the year for different plants. So it gets a little complicated on seeding rates, but all of this was broadcast seeded. I used to own some drills and I used them for very few native grasses. It wasn't worth the upkeep, so we sold the drills and I broadcast the same ones I used to drill. I don't see a big difference in seeding rate, whether you're drilling or whether you're broadcasting.
Part of what keep in mind, part of what he said there on them growing on top of each other, that's how we get to that 200%, is that they grow from the same place. That and different plants have different structure, and that allows you to pack more forage in a smaller area.
And that structure is above ground and below ground. You got deep-rooted plants with roots heading straight down, with a shallow-rooted plant growing right next to them, and their roots may hardly even touch. You know, they're just in different zones.
And another thing that I hadn't really touched on either was, you know, he's talking about in that winter grazing, having some green out there, and they eat a little green and along with some brown. A little bit of green is very valuable in the winter time, and that's part of how we make that work. Is that spring calving cow, that she has a very high forage demand from the time that she calves through her lactation period, and you wean that calf off in the fall, and now she's a dry cow and she has a much lower forage demand going through winter. And that's part of how we can do that with a lot of brown grass out here, is we have a little green in there with it, and a cow just can do all right and make it through winter even with no hay. And still make that system work, and we can lower our cost a lot by doing a system like that. It's what drives, economics is always a big driver of why you can do things. What other questions?
Nutrition wise, do you still have to use trace mineral and stuff like that, or is the diversity enough that they get all what they want from the plants?
I don't know what he's doing exactly, so I'll let him on this particular herd. But
remember, that's easy. So we've been kind of experimenting the last 2 years and quit giving the cattle mineral at all. And I found that the longer I go without giving them mineral, the more forbs they eat. If I do give them mineral, and I started again this year, but giving them a little mineral just to see what would take place, their forb consumption goes down when I make the mineral available. We did fine. I mean, we did fine without mineral. I think I gave these in the last 12 months. These have probably had 2 bags of mineral. Just some cheap MFA Super 12 or something like that's what I buy. They do like it, mineral and salt both, but at least for 2 years they went without any at all, and I really couldn't tell the drop in their performance. I do think
that you did see an increase in their ability or wanting to eat the forbs when they didn't have.
Yep. And part of that too is like over there's a pile of charcoal and ashes from that slash project. They'll eat ashes, they like ashes, and if you withhold mineral, they will eat more wood ash and charcoal stuff. I think in general, if a guy is focused mostly on trying profitability, you need them cows bred, a mineral plan is not a bad thing. It kind of, I'd say it helps. The longer it's in diverse natives too, the more I feel like you get minerals built up. Minerals, a lot's coming from the rock and down deep in the soil, and you're pulling those up with the plants. But just because that cow may need magnesium doesn't mean this plant cares. It's coming up just because it's coming up with other things. And magnesium may be a poor example, I don't know. But I don't think the forage is all that concerned about the cow health and trying to make them healthy. But over time, as we pull things up, a lot of our minerals and so fertilizer, a lot of it is not that it's not available in the ground. It's not available in the shallow rooting zone of most people's forages. So they keep applying it on the top, and it keeps leaching down through the ground below the rooting zone. And then you get a concentration of it down here below the rooting zone. So this has not been fertilized at any time since it's been in diverse natives. And back when it was in Fescue, we may have did some fall fertilizer with it. So that we're looking at 20 years ago was the last fertility this field has seen added to it. And in fact, we don't encourage people to fertilize natives. My experience is some of the forbs will grow bigger with fertilizer. Some of the cool season grasses will. The weeds all will grow bigger. The warm season grass, unless it's been severely abused or you're haying a lot, will not respond. Has been my experience. I've done some trials where in warm season grass I spread just a strip across the field, and if it wasn't for the ragweed growing better there, I wouldn't have known where the strip was. So we don't do a lot of fertilizer on our place.
But if you are haying, and the natives make wonderful hay, like you can come in here in about a month and you can cut this blue stem down and it's like 2 pounds a gain a day quality. Now the forage tests don't always show that, because the forage tests are not made for a warm season grass. They're made for a cool season grass. But it's like 2 pounds a gain a day quality. You can put that in a hay bale, you get it put upright. It's 2 pounds a gain a day hay at that point that you can feed in the winter or whenever you're feeding the hay. So it makes wonderful hay. And in that case, like the fertility, if you're gonna take nutrients off in the form of a hay bale, put nutrients back on. That's kind of our take on it.
So does diversity make sense if you're going to hay but not graze? You're probably only graze hay maybe once at the most price.
Yeah, so does diversity make sense if we're going to hay and not graze? I think so. Some of the best quality hay, I mean, it's not alfalfa quality hay, but it's like really good quality hay is prairie hay. So never been plowed, remnant grasslands that they hay. That's high dollar, it's good stuff. And so I think that the diversity is good. Now, there's a few caveats to that. If you put like these sunflowers in there, the tall forbs out here, if you put that in there, that is gonna be a stem in your hay bale, right? Now, it may add minerals to the quality of your hay, so it may add to it, but if you look at that and you just can't stand seeing stems in your hay, you may not want that diversity out there, right? If you want a perfect looking hay field and you're going to maintain it with herbicides, the diversity will eliminate some options for herbicides. And so there's reasons not to, but we think the diversity gives you a lot more stability in production. It gives you a lot more, you've got you're not just eating big blue stem. Back to pick your favorite food. You're not just eating the same thing. There's diversity to your diet. So we like the diversity with it.
Another point of hay in the native warm seasons is mostly what you would hay. The diversity would be fine, but the bulk of what you're going to hay is the warm season. You could cut that at a good time of year. We try to cut ours between the end of June and like July 15th is getting kind of late. That's a good time of year to cut and dry hay. Whereas a lot of your cool seasons that people are trying to hay, you're really getting way past the prime now, but we haven't had weather to cut and lay down hay and get it dry. So another little thing on hay that's getting popular is to do wet baling so they can cut it earlier, not dry it, and put it in the bale and silage it. That does not work very well with the native warm seasons. They are a lot more efficient with water. It might work today just fine. So I don't know that. I do have a friend that tried to do some haylage with big blue stem cutting in July, and you need about 30% moisture content, and they cut it and followed it immediately with the baler, and they could only get about 28% moisture in it. So it was a little bit low. It did go ahead and ferment. It did wind up not being, the cows ate it well, but it just didn't have that real sweet smell like you get with when things go right. But anyways.
They do make some silage out of some of the native plants. Eastern gamagrass is one that they will ensile. And then there's also a native forb, wildflower, pollinator plant, whatever you want to call it, that it makes excellent silage, and that's called cup plant. Some of the first research was actually done in Russia. Go figure, we have to take it to another country, to learn about how good it is for forage. But it actually makes dairy quality silage. Like you can feed it, feed 2/3 alfalfa and 1/3 cup plant, and your production stays right there at the same level. So good quality stuff.
So the last thing about diversity is, nutrient cycling. So we're able to cycle these nutrients from one green growing plant to the next green growing plant. And if it doesn't, and these microbes want to be fed all year long. So if we don't have a green growing plant, we don't have microbial activity going on. And it just keeps for a healthy microbial, network going on down below. And so that we've got that all going, as, when things do green up. And if we cycle these nutrients, we don't have to feed the microbes. These nutrients are just cycling from one plant to the next. Otherwise, it might have to be microbially mediated, which then you got to feed sugars. The plant has to feed sugars to the microbes to bring in the nutrients. So I think that's another reason, that we might want some green in the wintertime in our hay field.
Do you have any idea how we can partition that out in terms of dry matter? I mean, the way right now you would say, I have no idea, 8,000, 10,000 pounds of dry matter per acre. What is that from the cool season perspective? How much do you have in winter?
So, and I don't know, Elizabeth probably has some data from my...
So the one part of data I can give is like they did a study with some of the wild rye. So like Southeast wild rye, Virginia wild rye, I think Canada wild rye was in there, and this was in Mississippi. And they were comparing those. They also had like fescue in there, orchard grass, that sort of thing. And they were getting up around 5 tons to the acre. which was very similar, maybe just a touch less than the fescue and the orchard grass were, which those were improved varieties, right? And so that's, you know, maybe we could actually get equal if we had the improved varieties. But the more beautiful thing is not what one species can produce, it's what you can get when you have the warms or the cools and then the warms, because we can produce so much more per acre when you're filling all the seasons. But then too, like the wild rice, it's, you don't have, you know, in your research experiment, you put one here and you put one here and you put the fescue there, etc. But with the, in diversity, we can mix them up. And you think, well, how much difference can one cool season have compared to the next? But if you just look at the wild rice, like early wild rye is the first to come off. So it does its growth spurt at a certain time there in the spring, very early. And it's the one that's blooming here today. So like this is its head. And it's blooming today. So, but then the Virginia wild rye and the Jejunus wild rye, in about 2 weeks, they'll come off and do their thing. And then in another 2 weeks, we'll have Southeast and Canada and bottlebrush grass do their thing. So if we can have cool seasons that are growing all the way from the first warm-up days through, you know, the end of the, way past the end of the cool season, then, well, what if the weather wasn't any good for the early wild rye? Well, you've got the next one. It actually rained or the temperatures got right or whatever. So it gives you a lot more stability when you actually mix them together and have the diversity. Somebody asked about wormer. Do we worm the cattle?
No. I assume our herd was wormed at one point in history, but we haven't wormed. I'll occasionally get one that kind of looks poor and worm it, because that's what I guess I think I should do. And if it gets better, I sell it. But usually it doesn't make any difference. We don't really do any medicating. We do give a black leg shot. And that's really the only, we don't do any worm, we just do black leg. We do have problems on one of our farms with black leg. If we don't vaccinate, you'll have some dead ones. Occasionally we'll get a sickness that comes through, and you can tell they're sick, you know, maybe nasal, maybe they lose some weight. A lot of times I will then give them a bag of mineral or two, just kind of, I don't know, you got to do something, so you give them a bag of mineral, make them feel good.
And that's probably in the winter when you see problems like that.
In the winter. And we don't, I've got a vet in Houston I like a lot, and he says that, you know, if they get sick, they might die, they might live. A lot of that, he doesn't really feel like I'm not going to spend much money, so he doesn't spend a lot of time on me. And so, like last year, we did have a sickness come through, and I think it's going to affect our breeding rate adversely this year, or I can tell it's going to. We can figure it out with a vet, and we can vaccinate, or I sold a few head that got really bad looking, and the rest of them recovered on their own, and I kind of believe a lot in immunity versus continual vaccination. But again, you know, if your vaccine is not all that expensive a lot of times, and if you're trying, this is not our main focus to make a living off of the cattle themselves. We've got a herd of bison, we're doing the seed thing. We keep the cattle so that when people call and like, where your cows eat that, we know when they eat it, what time of year they eat it. We know it works. We can show people what we're doing. So we get the freedom to experiment a little bit. If I don't make any calves, well, I don't like that, but it's okay. So we get to play with some immunity things, whereas you might choose to vaccinate, which is probably not all dumb. Might save you a little bit of sleepless nights wondering what you're going to do.
I think that's very true. Always keep in mind a little bit that their big focus is seed here, and so how they manage their cattle is not necessarily always the best way for everybody else that's trying to raise cattle as their main focus.
My main goal is to not run out of grass, have fat cows, and That's pretty easy because we didn't even talk economics in that anywhere. So he's worried about it. He does the math.
What other questions?
Are you going to see the bison later?
We're going to go through, there's 66 acres back here. We're going to go through where they're at. If they're not down there and people want to go see them after we get done here, I'll take people up on a trailer or truck, whatever, and show them to them.
I guess one thing I might mention too, talking about the fertilizing and whatnot, is we know of prairies that have been hayed for like 120 years straight. Like that's what they do to them, and they very rarely put fertilizer on those prairies. And their tonnage is still, it's not great, you know, they'll put up like a ton and a half of hay, but that's not too bad for not doing anything to it. There's like zero input. Sometimes they get burned, you know, in the off season. And that's it. And I always like to think about that a little bit. Like try doing that to a fescue field. What happens to it if you don't fertilize it and you pull hay off of it for 100 years straight? Yeah, that's right. They said it, broom sedge, which is a native, by the way, but anyway, not usually the most desirable native, but anyhow, broom sedges will live on very low fertility, and the reason that works on those prairies where they still maintain pretty good diversity in them, as long as they didn't spray it too much. That'll take the diversity out of a prairie, but if they don't spray it, it'll maintain diversity and it will continue to produce you know, decent kind of a hay crop. And the only way that can happen is those deep roots and all that diversity working together is keeping those things going. The mycorrhizal fungi, that's part of what I'm talking about. That network of microbes and fungi and everything that's in there keeps mining it from down deep in the soil. Now we have seen a prairie that there was a fence row across it, and they took that fence out at some point. I didn't see the fence, maybe Rex did, but anyway, I have seen the spot, and you would swear when you're coming across there harvesting seed that there's a terrace or something in this field, because the vegetation gets taller and then it gets shorter right on the other side. And that's one of those hay prairies. They couldn't hay that fence row. There's still more fertility in there. So that tells you that haying, they have mined a lot of fertility out of that. And another thing that we've seen is in some places where they were doing that, somebody talked them into only haying 2/3 of it and leaving 1/3 of it to sit fallow, you know, and not haying that third. And after just a few years, they got the same amount of hay off of 2/3 of the prairie as they got off of the whole prairie when they hayed the whole thing every year. So it makes a difference, you know. It did in that case, you know, it let those plants rest a little bit, probably regain some root down there to mine a little more out of the soil. I'm not really saying that this is all great management on those prairies, but I am saying that that's impressive to me that you can do that, because you sure couldn't do it to a fescue field. As they said, it'll turn into broom sedge. And we have dug some soil pits. I don't know if they dug any in this field particularly, but over on the next one we did, and this is pretty rocky, not great soil. Like 4 feet, there's still roots down there. And you won't get that with fescue either. It's not that deep rooted of a plant. And neither are the native cool seasons, typically aren't that deep rooted either. It's the forbs and the warm seasons that are getting way down there.
What is this soil graded? Do they have a 1 to 8?
She's the soils girl. Ask her.
That's a good question. Like, I don't ever pay attention. You know, when you're in crop country, I think you pay attention to that grade. This is not a good.
Are there negative
crop.
numbers?
Now, that doesn't mean my ancestors didn't try to crop it, because they did. Like, some of the statistics of how much of the Ozarks is cropped, you're like, there's not that much flat ground out here. That's right, they were cropping the hillsides. And I think we washed a lot of topsoil down the stream as a result. But yeah, I don't know, but we are not prime crop ground, but you can tell that by looking.
We've got about 4 inches of kind of, there'll be chert mixed in it, but like your topsoil layer, about 4 inches. Then under that, we'll kind of go to a clay in most of this. And then bedrock's going to range from, you know, right down here on the hillside, bedrock's on the surface, right under our feet. Where I'm at, I'd say it's about 2 foot. Over where you're at, there's actually a little bowl there that I'd say is a little deeper. So it varies, but it's all pretty shallow topsoil layer of the good black, you know, kind of dirt.
Unless you got that river bottom land like some of us do.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe one way to kind of understand how prairies can behave without fertilizing is a concept that regenerative farmers talk about, energy flow. So we have the sun, you know, shining down. How much energy can we intersect, you know, with diversity? And obviously it's more with diversity when we think cool season, warm season. When we think about this layering of leaves, look at those sunflowers with their horizontal leaves are catching more sunlight, and then as you know, even the warm season grasses, the sunlight can still go down through those, and you know, we're getting sunlight down low. So how much energy from the sun, and that energy from the sun is then going into the soil as root exudates, as you know, as cycling of urine and whatnot. So that energy then is going back into the soil. So that's how the prairie, you know, is doing what it's doing. Certainly the prairie grasses, the big blue stem on the prairie is not this big. It is what they're really hurting by paying it so regularly. It just can't. Its job is to share its sugars with soil life to make nutrients available and to move these nutrients around. And when you look at what the job of functional diversity, each kind of functional diversity class has a job. The job of the big grasses is to share its sugars. The job of the cool season grasses is to cycle these nutrients and not let those nutrients get away, and we don't have to microbially mediate. And then the job of the forbs, a lot of times these secondary plant compounds may actually be slowing down microbial decay, because to keep that organic matter in the soil, to keep a functioning system, some of those secondary plant compounds are known to slow down microbial decay. So, you know, it's complicated, and that's why you need them all. You know, that's why, and you know, our idea, you know, of course we were brought up with fertilizer, we can put all this on with fertilizer, but we really can't do that anymore. So we really have to change what's going on right between the ears and accept some of these plants with stems, you know, that this is part of the system. And you know, and the cool season and warm season growing together, that was, you know, that was foreign to me. You know, it's just, I'd been on the prairies, I had seen all this stuff happening. I just, you know, as a farmer, as an agriculturalist, I didn't know it was that cool. So, well, I think Colt has set us up with an experiment at the top of the hill.
What happens when you burn native plants and you graze? You burn part of a field and you graze it, and you don't burn the other part. They eat what you burn. So, and there's an idea called patch burn grazing, where you're rotating animals by burning a spot, and you rotate the spot you burn, the animals will follow the fire the next year. I'm kind of doing that here. Actually, I was burning that field, the fire got out. So just kind of felt random management. I didn't mess up, I just did something different. And what you'll see in here is a lot more forbs. Somewhere up here I see the cut plant. The sunflowers are big everywhere. Like this here is Plains coreopsis. This is a biannual native forb, and it takes disturbance or you won't see it. If you don't bare the soil, it won't germinate. The seeds just stay there waiting for their opportunity. You throw out a mineral tub or stomp it up around a water tank, do a burn, and then it pops up. You'll be hard pressed to find any on the other side of the road because the ground was covered with thatch.
Now somebody out there in the crowd knows what this is, and they're wondering if you're worried about these out here.
So this is common ragweed. Common ragweed is an annual introduced weed.
It's native.
Oh, sorry.
It's native.
It is a native, unintroduced weed.
Far as I know, like you'll see it out on the prairies. It's just being an annual in a perennial derived system, like it doesn't show itself unless you get that disturbance. And so the fire here promotes it more than no fire. I'm not going to say there's not some over there,
Bare ground
but bare ground. Same thing with that Plains coreopsis that he. And the ragweed, I mean, the cattle will eat it a little bit at some point, but actually it's excellent quail food. The seeds are high oil content, high protein, so they're excellent quail food. So a little bit of it out here doesn't really concern us.
Unless you got allergies, then you won't like it. And that's just one time a year. So you'll have the forbs that you see here though, like behind me, where they stand out more. The cattle will have focused their grazing here more when they were in here. And the grass then is shorter, giving the forbs, this is their year to really shine. They got the nutrient release, they got the ash from the burn, helping them grow. Then the cattle are suppressing the grasses more because the grass really is lusher, tastes better, more nutritious than where we didn't burn. So the forbs are having a really good year in here. I assume they like the forbs a little better as well, but it doesn't show up as much as it does in the grass, that they consume it better after a burn. And this year you'll get to put some of that seed of tinctoria back on the ground here for the next disturbance year. I like to burn our fields somewhere between every 3 and 5 years. Some I burn every other year. It's just kind of random management, whatever's easy. What you're doing to burn, if you look down, you can kind of see bare ground between the plants. And I don't know that that's a great thing, other than it gets seed germination. You come over here where there would be bare ground, you've got probably 3-4 inches of this, which is, that's it standing up there in that treetop. It couldn't blow down. The ice didn't knock it down there because the trees helping support it. This went down naturally. This one stayed standing. We're not doing anything to knock it down other than cattle graze it and knock it down some. But mostly this goes down because it gets weak stem, top of the ground starts to fall over by spring. And that's what I burned off over there. And this is a big part of your brush control, is to burn every so often. The persimmon sprouts that are coming up, brush, blackberry along the edge, that's how we're keeping them beat back, is by burning. And these fires, there is a lot of fuel a lot of times when we're burning these. So do have a burning plan if you're going to burn them. But burning is a natural part. Go ahead.
Do you have several people?
I used to burn a lot with my dad, and then and we use like roads, different things to have plans. And the biggest thing is we've got a plan and a backup plan. That's the way of trying to make it safe. How he taught me to burn a lot was, I'm going to go burn today. I'll probably need help here in a bit. So you go light it and then call, and you go help him put it out. And then we got Mike. He's had a lot of burning experience driving one of the trucks. I've got a crew I can pull from if I need it. But most of our burns, we probably burned 1,500 acres this year, and most of it I burned myself. And then call if I need help. But for the most part, like, you know, my plan was to stop it at that fence. It didn't happen, but I knew this road's here. If it got over this road, it'd still be on us, and there's a creek down there. So at some point, you know, if it was all the neighbors right next door, I would get more help.
What Colt's got going for him is 25 years of experience, and he knows the land, right? And so he can do a lot more with a lot less than you know, even somebody that had 25 years of burn experience but didn't know the land, or somebody that knew the land but had never burned a day in their life. So it's crucial to be safe. There's training to get out there. The Missouri Department of Conservation, for instance, has a burn class that you can go to. So it's crucial. Don't burn down the neighbor's house. It's not a good day.
Yep. And those other things we'll use, on the burning side, I don't like to work any harder than I have to. So sometimes I'll take the livestock, cattle or bison, and drive them up and down the fence row 2 or 3 times, and then gotta get it mashed down, give me a little spot where I can work. Lane them to water in the fall up a fence line where we know we're going to try to stop fire. A lot of times I'll start burns like 9 o'clock in the morning in the winter when I know that it's yet not going to burn very good. I'll work to put my black line in. By 10 o'clock I got my black line in, wait a half hour. I'm at the ball time of day, I'll go light my forward fire and get it finished off. So just different things I play with. But, yeah. Yep.
So you're telling me the difference between the grass over here that's pocket knife high and the grass over there that's barely knee high is you burned that so they grazed that better.
Yep.
And you moved them on before they could really graze this effectively at all.
Yep.
So they would look the same if they had been burned the same.
Yep. And to give you an idea of what I did graze in here, would have been 3 weeks ago, so 21 days ago, let's say. The live cattle were in here. This side, they probably removed half of the forage. And I was looking here, so I have leaves. I can see a mark down in here. There is, not that one. There is that much regrowth from the, see that where that's bit off? That was down here 21 days ago. So it has regrowed that top. I took roughly that much off. Now keep in mind, we're getting later in the year as well, so the grass is naturally getting taller. But that's, I took this side down that much 21 days ago, and this side would have been 4 inches tall with most of the grass whenever I left 21 days ago. So that is a lot of really fast, a lot of it growing back really fast. And if you'll notice over here, what was grazed mostly has a sharp point on the leaf, just like it's never been grazed. I've seen, here's one here that doesn't, it's been bit off. What that tells me is I ate the growth point over here. The growth point is the factory where the leaves come out of the stem. And if I graze over there higher and don't remove the growth point, the ends of the leaves will be blunt because they got bit off but then continue to grow up and out. Over here, when you remove the growth point, you eat the factory that makes the leaves. The plant uses root resources to rebuild the factory, then grow a new leaf so it has the natural tip back on it, the sharp pointed tip.
From the
growth point on the natives is higher than it is on a lot of the cool season forages. So that is where Loren was saying they're not that delicate, there's just kind of some management. If you keep grazing them down this high, you'll keep eating the factory that makes the leaves, you'll keep taking energy out of the roots to rebuild the factory. For too long, the roots are depleted and you're getting less growth. So it's keep grazing higher, which is usually right now, I'd say your growth point 6 to 8 inches above the ground on most of the warm season forage in here. And if you look at their structure, the leaves really, the good lush growth is kind of from here up. This is, they'll eat it and they'll do quite well on it, but it's a little more lignin, a little bit more stiffer, and they don't naturally want to graze it to super low. They'll kind of graze to a certain height and then you have to leave them a few extra days too long to get them to go low. And it gets easier through the season where this has been grazed shorter and actually kind of, let's say maybe even damaged a little bit. I did eat the growth point off of it. So got a guy whistling at quail, he's got one at you. And so when I come back and graze this again, they're going to prefer this again because it was grazed shorter, it's more vegetative. And that's going to be true through the whole year. I'm not probably going to put a poly wire up. I'll use this as my indicator of when to move and not that. And it goes back to kind of that random management. If I treat it all the same, I'm going to start to lose my diversity. So within a field, I want different management through the year to keep maintaining diversity. I'll move that management around, that different management. If that makes any sense.
Something else I was going to bring up was when he was talking about it stemmy down here. If you were going to hay this, if you can set your skid plates on your haying equipment up a little bit, you're not going to lose much. This is the stemmy stuff that's not that great anyway, and it will sure help the field if you leave that on there. It will be a vast improvement if you're going to hay it.
The regrowth will start to happen in days instead of weeks.
And one other principle I didn't bring up earlier. It's just kind of a guideline. I don't know if it's a true principle, but anyway, fast growth, fast rotation. Slow growth, slow rotation. So like this time of year, things are growing very fast. So we can move fast, like we can come back sooner. But in August, when it ain't rained for 45 days and it may not rain for another 45, and then things are dry and it's hot and it's miserable, then the growth is slow. Slow that growth down because you're going to need more time for that plant to recover before you get back. So that's just a rule of thumb. When I tell you it's a moving target, it's always changing how soon you can come back.
Species that the cows don't really like the first pass through, or they would mature and then they're never going to eat them? Depends on, and it depends year to year, but it also, if you look out through here, you don't see near as many rye heads as you did over there. I grazed this in April and early May, 2 grazes, one in early April, one in early May, and they consume the rye at that time. So over there, they're not going to want the rye so much because it's got a head of them. Here, they did eat the rye early. When you get into the forbs, it varies. Like I say, this year they're eating the sunflowers, and typically they're not eating the sunflowers this time of year. I don't really know what the difference is. Mom observed one time trying to get some pictures for marketing of cattle. The sunflowers were blooming, so she wanted to get, they was like this tall blooming. She wanted to get the picture of them eating the blooms off of them, and she wanted, of course, a cow. So the way nature's set up, you can't ever get what you want. The calves were eating the blooms off the sunflowers, and the cows were entirely ignoring them. And different growth patterns, different animals, they were wanting something in that sunflower, and the adult cattle were not. So it varies a lot. There's very few. There's some white blooming yarrow out here. The cows are not going to eat that unless they're starving to death. They do not like it. It's high in those plant secondary compounds that, and I don't know particularly what that one does. The white beard tongue, he was talking about them eating it. We know it has a compound in it that actually slows the animal's heart rate down. And I've noticed that deer, bison, and cattle all eat white beard tongue in about middle of February. White beard tongue stays green all winter and grows all summer, and I've never seen them eat it in the summer like he did. But I have seen about every February 15th, when that old growth dies and it starts to shoot up new growth, for about 2 weeks they'll clean the whole field up with white beard tongue. And I think those are examples of times when nature is lowering the amount of plant secondary compounds because it doesn't mind being eaten at that time. Also, that is very easy stockpile. They don't eat it all year long, and then in late February, when I really want that green pick-me-up, they go to eating it. I don't have to fence it separate. I don't have to do any kind of management. It just naturally happens. And there's several of the forbs, cool season forbs, that they don't eat until wintertime. So that's just kind of, sedges are a lot that way. Right now we're getting far enough along in the year, they're laying off the sedges, and they won't really start hitting them till real late November and mostly December, and then they'll graze them through the winter. So there'll be plenty of growth. They could do it, they just choose not to until later. So cycles, different times of year.
Look, that field we were in just a few minutes ago, how many different forbs did you see in there, and how many came up?
Well, the original seeding, I don't know, maybe 10.
Over there or over there? The one over there, we actually planted 100 species in total. And some of that was to learn about the different species and how they react to it. Well, it's just that hill right over there. But
in that particular field,
I would
you
say
wouldn't
about,
necessarily- well,
I'd say about 10
yeah,
forbs.
you wouldn't plant purple coneflower in there just because it looks pretty, because it wouldn't help you necessarily.
Well, actually, there is purple cone in there, and it would bloom in about another 2-3 weeks. It start to elongate and bloom, so you start to notice it. But it is highly preferred by cattle.
But not right now, because you can't get to it yet.
It's probably about that tall. They'll be eating it some while they're in there. The other thing slows it down is it's greens up early, and I did a late burn, so it won't be as visible. But yeah, there is like purple cone, oxeye sunflower.
There's your gray
There's a gray-headed coneflower. So there's a lot of the forbs that, two reasons they're not visible. Either we see them a lot when they're blooming, of course.
Right, well, it's really low in the canopy.
Yep,
Yeah.
and a lot of the ones we chose to plant over there are cool season type forbs. So the burn, you'll see more forbs here, but there's not many blooming. And the fire kind of sets them back on their time schedule. Over there will be the exact same plants, but the grass is outgrowing it.
So you're saying you burned that this year in February or something like that? Did you say that?
This one here?
No, you burned
Oh,
this
yes, I burned this probably February, early
year
March.
ago. So I finally figured out that you set the forbs back. It doesn't have anything to do with that you encourage the grasses. Somehow the fire sets the forbs back.
So the warm season, like this big blue stem that's so predominant, Indian gamma grass, they're all completely dormant that time of year. So just like that tree at that time of year had no leaves,
Right.
burning it off didn't affect its growth cycle at all.
Oh, okay.
Now the forbs were up in green.
Some of
None
them.
are basil. They're not very upright, but they're green, and we burned that off. It had to rebuild the factory. It had to start all over.
But
And
some
that's what-
species of forbs are very much a warm season type. So like these sunflowers here,
They were dormant.
they were dormant, like the big blue stem was, and it's like a boost of fertilizer to them. So if they've got green leaves, if something is actively growing and you burn it, it's going to set it back. If we were to go out here and burn that today, that big blue stem would go, oh my goodness, they just restarted me at the ground. I had all this green leaf. I have to pull from the root reserve. So it depends on the species. Everything reacts different. Well, I'm hauling this bag around, Colt. Oh,
I wanted to show
Go
you
ahead.
one more thing about these sunflowers and big blue. You got these sunflowers. There's a stem there on the other side of the trailer. Some of them taller ones, these sunflowers are going to get like 8-10 feet tall. You're like, why would I want that in my field? If they're not going to eat it in particular, some years they do, some years they don't, why would I want that? And you want to talk about making carbon, putting carbon into the soil. The roots on these sunflowers die every year. The plant itself doesn't die. The crown will stay alive, but this green root here will die, and it will make another entire root system the next year. And about all that's left already of that old root system is a little bit of one hanging on here. But everything else, when I pull them, come off out of the ground, and they will loosen soil. Where we grow sunflowers and monoculture for seed production, it's almost like you took a tiller and run it about 4 inches deep over the hole, because you are just decomposing a lot of stuff underground, and so those roots dying.
and then not only do you have the dying roots, but this is last year's carcass of the plant. They burned up over here, but you'll always have some of this stem. And so, you know, this is very high carbon. It's such high carbon that it hasn't even fallen over yet, like it's standing upright over there. And so it's very high carbon. This will be like mulch in a garden, right? Just the same as some of the warm seasons are. But a fun little fact, if this gets broken off and it's still standing here come summer, there's some of the bees, the native bees, we have like 500 native bee species in Missouri. You know, before I knew that fact, I would have been like, there's 5. Bumblebees, honeybees, they're not native. Sweat bees, I don't know, carpenter bees, I only come up with 4, right? But there's like 500 species of bees. Some of them like to nest in stems. So they will actually mine out, this is kind of a hollow, or not a hollow center, but a soft center. And they will mine that out, and they will lay eggs. They'll lay an egg and a row of pollen, an egg, a row of pollen, an egg, a row of pollen. And then those babies hatch out, they eat that pollen. and voila, you've got a little baby bee flying around at that point. So just kind of part of the fun ecosystem that you get.
Another thing that's getting popular is biochar. People talk about adding biochar to fields. When you burn a field, you have ash, it'll turn gray, and then you'll have black stuff, and then you'll have the stems left over. Where those meet, you're making biochar and or charcoal, and you're doing that on a very large level when you burn grasslands. What doesn't burn and what does burn, where the two meet, you're making charcoal. That's kind of a, and it does actually add to your organic matter quite a bit. Char is another form of organic matter.
It's a very long-term form of organic matter. Some things break down real quick, but it stays around for hundreds of years potentially. I'm carrying this bag around here. I want to tell them the secret. I might have like a meerkat or something. Are you?
I hope it doesn't involve me a lot.
Well, I'm going to have you reach into the bag here in a little bit. And yeah, it reminds me of the time that I was a little girl about yay big and went into the hardware store, Debo's. And Debo was a little bit of a jokester, but yeah, I'm just a little girl scared of the world. And he's like, I got a mongoose. You want to come see it? And I mean, this sounds cool. So I'm like, sure. And I'm with my dad. And so we go back there and he gets on these gloves, welding gloves. I'm like, gosh, this mongoose must be a little mean. And so he's going to get his mongoose out of this box. And all of a sudden, this mongoose like flies out at me. And I'm like, oh my goodness, it's going to attack me. Well, it turns out it's just a little piece of fur. And he's playing tricks on little girls like me. Might be what's in the bag. You're going to have to watch it. Okay.
I told you a long time.
So we'll see if there's a mongoose in there or not. But we did some experiments one year. It's been, I don't know, 10 years ago maybe. When we did these, we went over there on that hillside. That was the first one of these diverse plantings we've done. And we went over here. That was Fescue, just over there where you can see those oak trees. And we tried to match the hillside the best we could. You know, you can't do perfect. It's not side by side, but this is just anecdotal stuff. This is not a scientific, highly replicated study anyway. And we drive one of the infiltration rings in. I don't know if you guys have ever had experience with these, but it's just a little metal ring. You drive it in the ground and you get what's equal to an inch of water and you dump it in. And you set your clock and you wait. And you see how long it takes for the water to go in the soil. But what we want, of course, is the water to go in rapidly, right? We want, when there's an inch of rain that comes in an hour, or an inch of rain that comes in 10 minutes, we want to absorb as much of that, infiltrate it, might be a better word, into the soil as we can. And so this soil health specialist comes down, Doug Peterson, he's retired from NRCS now, but he comes down and he's teaching us how to do this. And so we do it on that hillside with the natives. We do it on that hillside with the fescue, and we're going to compare. So we go over here to the natives first, and it takes like the first minute, the first inch, they say doesn't matter as much, because what if it's really dry or really wet? So we kind of get everything on an even playing field by doing an inch. You're supposed to ignore that. I can never quite ignore it. And then you do another inch. It's that second inch that they really talk about. So that first inch, we'll just go ahead and talk about it, goes in like a minute and 30 seconds.
Meaning if it rained an inch in a minute and 30 seconds, theoretically we could not have runoff.
Theoretically, yep. Over here on the fescue, it wasn't bad. It was 3 minutes. I mean, inch in 3 minutes, that's pretty good. We went and did our second inch over here, and it went in about 12 minutes. So if it rains 2 inches in like 15 minutes, we're good to go in theory. Over here, it took about 30 minutes to get that second inch in. Well, that's not terrible, but it does show me, like I did say, Doug, what's bad? He said, well, we dumped some in one the other day, waited for an hour, it looked like it hadn't moved, and we finally just left. That's bad. That was a crop field. And so, not to give the impression that all crop fields are that way, but you know, like management matters, right? So it's not, I mean, an inch in 30 minutes, it's not terrible, right? And we had good management on the fescue. But what we got to noticing, well, not only was it better, but we're like, well, why is that? So part of it is what we were noticing is there's a lot more earthworm holes over here than there is in the fescue. And so, you know, our native ecosystem is a lot more friendly to native earthworms than an introduced grass that has the endophyte that, you know, that endophyte doesn't just stop at affecting cattle. It affects microbes, it affects a lot of things. So there was a lot more earthworms, like 2 or 3 times as many over here as there was in the fescue. And then the other thing that happens is when you get a diversity of plants, like one of the keys of soil health is have a diversity of plants. And what happens when you do, and they really talk about you want a lot of different families of forbs to get that infiltration and that aggregation down deep. And you say, what is aggregation? Well, that's the other part of what's giving us this infiltration, the water going into the soil. And what you want is like unique clumps of soil, way smaller than my fist down here. So I like to think of cottage cheese. You know, if you took cottage cheese and you like got rid of all the milky stuff out of it and you just have the clumps left, you can like dump water through that in a hurry as opposed to your yogurt. If you try to dump water through yogurt, like it's not going very fast. It does not have good aggregation is the fancy word that we'll use for that. So diversity is really key, and having things growing in different seasons. Our fescue pasture is a cool season pasture. It has cool season clovers in it. So I mean, we have some diversity in it, but we don't have warm seasons in it, for instance. So we're not maximizing basically our soil health over there, so we get less water in the soil. But that's not where the story of soil health and water in the soil really stops. Because the other thing that we have going is we need to hold the water in the soil. Once it gets in there, we don't want it to leave today. We want it to hang out and be used by our plants and like slowly feed the streams and all of that. So how do we get the water to be held in the soil? Well, that's organic matter, soil organic matter. Basically, that's dead, decomposed plant material or animal material that we can't really identify anymore. So I'm not talking about this as organic matter, but when this gets broken down, a microbe gets a hold of it and turns it into dark soil. That organic matter is causing the soil to be dark. Then we're able to hold a lot more moisture in the soil. And so usually I have, and I just didn't bring them because it's hard to get a bucket of water up here, 2 sponges that one is very absorbent sponge and one is not. And what we want our soil to be is the one that like can hold lots of water. And so we actually, when we did our first planting of this, we had because it was a conservation innovation grant, I was going to say we had the foresight, but no, really they wanted us to do it. And so it turned out to be useful. We took soil samples beforehand and we took soil samples 5 years later. So it was in fescue, we take the soil samples, and then we come back 5 years later, it's in natives now, and we take the soil samples. I would have been surprised for any positive change. I mean, in this meantime, we have sprayed glyphosate on there. I don't know how many of you guys are big fans of herbicide. Well, let's just do a quiz. There's kind of 3 classes of people. There's the people that are like, herbicides, I think they're a really good tool. I need to use them responsibly. I use them. There's the people that are like, I don't know enough. And there's the people that are like, I hate them. I think they're terrible. They're bad for the environment. They're bad for my health, etc., etc. So how many of you guys are in the category of, this is a good tool, I'll use it carefully? How many of you guys are in the category of, I don't know enough to make a good decision? And how many are in the category of, I don't really like herbicides? Okay, so a lot of times it's really a lot even higher to the I don't like herbicides when I do this quiz. And for us, a little side note, for us, getting rid of the existing vegetation so you can plant what you want is really crucial to success. Now you can do an overseed, and that's a whole nother conversation, but like getting rid of that existing vegetation is crucial. The best and most environmentally friendly, I will argue, way to do that is herbicides. And I don't use herbicides in my garden. I think they have some impacts on the environment. But to just use them for a limited amount of time, maybe we're going to spray 3 times, And then we're going to plant diversity. There is no option. We don't like this ragweed out there. Sorry, if you want to kill it, you're going to kill all the sunflowers, you're going to kill all the gray-headed coneflower, you're going to kill all that other stuff. So for a conversion where we're like, we're going to use it for a limited amount of time, and then we're going to move on. That is the best way we know how to do it. Everybody's got to make their own peace with that one way or another, but other alternatives get into like repeated tillage and cover the land with black plastic, and you know, repeated tillage doesn't even really work very well. So anyway, I digress. We took those soil samples year before conversion and then 5 years later. I thought, if anything, the soil quality, the organic matter in the soil is going to have gone downhill. We sprayed herbicides at least 3 times. We, you know, had it bare at points. Like, we did nothing good for this, except that we planted natives. And it turns out that planting natives must have been a big deal, because we increased in organic matter by almost 1%. And so you're like, 1%, is that a big deal? Because when I got a 1% grade on my chemistry test, they told me that wasn't good. But 1% organic matter is actually kind of a big deal. And so this is where the mongoose comes in. You ready for the mongoose? Okay, so you see this here. This is 1 square foot, a mongoose trap. Yeah, I didn't want you to know that. I'm disguising this.
Mongoose?
This is 1 square foot, roughly. Okay, so how much, 1% organic matter? Well, let me give you a hint. They tell us that 1% organic matter on an acre, 6 inches deep, will add 27,000 gallons of water holding potential. So we can hold an extra 27,000 gallons of water holding potential on that acre in the top 6 inches with 1% organic matter increase. Okay, so that's kind of like a number. I'm like trying to picture like a football field and filling 50-gallon drums with water, and this is just kind of blowing my mind. So we've got it down to this 1 foot by 1 foot mongoose trap. And you want to reach in here? You do you? Okay. I'll hold this, and you put the mongoose in the trap, okay?
Okay, all right. All of them?
Yeah, sure.
At a time?
No, 1 mongoose at a time here.
Practice. One at a time.
One at a time. Okay, so this is the extra amount of water that we can, if we filled each of these with water, this is the extra amount of water that we can hold in a 1 foot by 1 foot by 6 inches deep with 1% organic matter increase. I'm like, wow, I can kind of start to picture that, and this is a big deal. We can hold a lot of extra water in this. And so this is part of what makes me say, turns out no mongoose, sorry.
Yeah, darn.
This is part of what makes me say that I'm willing to use herbicides for a limited period of time to get this that's so much better for this is what built the highly productive prairie soils that we crop today and are so productive. And so now, get off of cropping here. We want water to get in the soil. We need that infiltration. We want water to be held well. We're able to do that better than when it was in fescue. And then we don't want the water to escape. And Colt's already mentioned this when he held out that big handful. I won't make you turn around again to go back over there. But that big handful of dead mulch, thatch, armor, whatever you want to call it for our soil, that's protecting the soil. And what that does is it prevents evaporation of water from the soil. It's like mulch in a garden. Not only does it keep the ragweeds beat back, that is annual things. Weeds in a garden are also annuals. Not only does it keep those beat back, but it also protects the soil from the heat. The sun can't get it over here. If it were sunny today and we were to take one of those little infrared thermometers and shoot the soil over here, on like just a moderate day, you can have 90, 100 degree soil surface. We are baking the microbes at, 110 degrees or something? There's some figure of when you start baking the microbes, and it has nothing to do with like 350 degrees in the oven or something like that. It's a lot lower than that. And so what we find is that from the soil health standpoint, we're able to have a lot healthier soil. I'm not saying the fescue was terrible, because it wasn't the crop field that, you know, they waited for an hour for it to run in, couldn't see any difference, and finally decided to leave. So I'm not saying it's terrible, but I am saying that we have found this to be better. There's more earthworms, better infiltration, better holding the water capacity, and better not let it escape, not let it be baked out of the soil, if you will. Now, you might think that story ends there, but it really doesn't. Because if, and Colt mentioned this earlier, but if we can get the water into the soil, it doesn't run for Louisiana on the same day that it rains, right? That's bad. That's bad. And Colt mentioned it from the wildlife standpoint in the creek. You know, mussels, they don't move very far. They're like our most endangered animal in the state of Missouri. And so these little water critters don't really like it when it gets all muddy and it, you know, we have these humongous floods. They would rather have water all year round rather than a lot of water in May or April and then a drought in August. They don't like it when their stream goes dry, as it turns out. So what happens when we have this infiltration up here, the water doesn't all race for Louisiana on the same day. And then the further impacts of that is it goes into the soil and it like filters through. And Colt talked about this with those coffee grounds. You know, you put your water in there and it slowly settles down through there and gravity takes over. It will eventually end up in Hog Creek down there. But it can, if the plant doesn't use it first, plant microbe, but it slowly can get there to sustain the flows in the creek. And so it makes me think of like the stories my dad used to tell. Our creeks have changed a lot, and Colt referenced this earlier too. Our creeks have changed drastically. My dad would tell about fishing in Hog Creek down here. Well, there's like no surface flow, like maybe all we have is a hole of water every now and again. But he would go wade and fish that thing when he was a boy. They would seine minnows and fish out of the creek to get a meal. You're not gonna, like today you could go seine yourself a minnow, I guess, but like you're not gonna get fish out of there to make a meal. You're gonna have to go on downstream to get more water. So the creeks have changed a lot. And I think part of that answer, you know, the springs have changed a lot. There's a spring just down here on the creek. And when my great-grandpa that bought this when he moved out of Fort Leonard Wood, he was working these fields down here. They would work up this way and they would stop and get a drink out of that spring. Well, that spring will run water, you know, and it's changing, but like I remember going 10 years ago, 15 years ago with my dad down there, and he showed me where this was and told me this story. And he says, you know, it only runs water anymore in the wet season. It's a wet weather spring. Well, those guys weren't looking for a wet drink of water. I mean, a drink of water in March or April is good. A drink of water in August is better. And so, you know, like times have changed, the springs have changed, but with the little branch that we crossed down there, you know, we have more flow in that more year round than when Colt and I were kids. And so there's more diversity. And yeah, we've converted some glades from cedars.
Flows increasing there.
Yep. There were glades that were cedar trees. We've cleared those and planted natives. There was fescue pastures we've converted to natives. And the other thing we've done is there was timber tracts that we have thinned. We haven't eliminated the trees, but we've actually done some infiltration rings in that sort of situation as well. If there are herbaceous plants, non-woody plants growing underneath the trees, we will infiltrate more water, just moving from right here where those plants are to right over here where it's just leaf litter. We will infiltrate more water over here than we will over there. And so that's another part of what we've done in that watershed. So I think some of this is bigger than just it's good for the cattle, right? Because it is good for the cattle. But the other thing is it's good for the environment. And yeah, like, again, that's not bringing the paycheck home. The environment is not. But because it's healthier, you're positively impacting the environment. So the paycheck comes in the form of the cattle, you get the extra conception that you get, those sort of things. But then the other benefits keep going.
Also the sustainability. I'm starting to get old enough, I'm worrying less about my paycheck and where my kids are going to get theirs. And if some of our farming practices, if we keep going the way we are, it's going to be rough for the next generation to pull a paycheck off the same land. We're just treating it too rough.
What's the old Native American saying? You should leave the land better than how you found it, or something along that lines.
Good,
yeah.
It's a good idea.
Now, there's another part to this. I think that when we're talking society and even ourselves, is the meat quality off of this. So there are people who will finish on a diverse native grassland. Steve Klubine, if you want to watch the video, I went up and talked to him and looked at his operation, and we did one on Pasture and Grazing too. If this is a concept you want to learn more about, pick that video up. But we did a different one. He has finished some cattle on natives. Now he's finishing them during the summer when we have this really excellent quality of growth. And so we'll leave that aside, but we'll look at, he actually was involved in a study, not an official, let's go for a set of observations, but they tested one of his steaks. They tested one from another guy who had a diversity of natives, and then they've got like their standards, this is a grain-fed steak, and this is a average pasture-fed steak, and that sort of thing. So what they find is that it doesn't matter how you raise your protein, your meat, your steak, there's certain benefits to it, right? Protein, iron, the things that we talk about. The reason that we inverted the food pyramid and we put, meats up here near the top is because they provide these health benefits. If you take that, it doesn't matter how you raise it, there's some of those benefits. If you take that and you raise it on grass, and we've talked about this since I was in college, you add conjugated linoleic acids to it, and you add omega-3 fatty acids, and you go, oh, I guess that's good, but it doesn't really sound all that good. But they tell me it's really good for your health. I mean, and you do. You see it like a bag of walnuts. It'll say, good, high in heart-healthy omega-3 fatty acids or whatever. Okay, so that's if you raise it on pasture. But if you raise it on a diversity, pasture with diversity, as opposed to just plain pasture, you add another level of stuff, and that's phytonutrients. And we've talked about this from the standpoint of the livestock, eating those, and like balancing their diet and self-medicating. But it goes further than just the livestock benefit. The plant produces them to protect itself. It tastes bitter at a certain time, and then the animals don't eat it. But maybe that concentration gets lower at some point, or the animal eats just a little bit to get that self-medicating effect. Okay, so what does that do for my health? Well, what they find is that those animals that have that diversity take the plant secondary compounds, or plant secondary metabolites is another name, or here's the one you may have heard, phytonutrients. Phyto meaning plant, nutrient meaning nutrient. So the phytonutrients, like phytonutrients, that's the reason we eat I eat blueberries because they taste good, but they're supposed to be good, high in all of these phytonutrients. Tomatoes have lycopenes, that's a phytonutrient. Essential oils, people use essential oils because of the phytonutrients. That's why mint smells minty. That's why chili peppers taste hot, spicy, that's a phytonutrient. So what happens is the animal takes those phytonutrients and they get into the meat and the milk. And so that health benefit is actually passed on to the person that is eating the meat or the milk of that animal, because they have basically, my silly example is, it's like you feed your cow blueberries and she turns the blueberries into those plant secondary compounds in her meat, and then you eat the cow. And so you get that same level of blueberry plant secondary compounds that you would have got by eating the steak or eating the blueberries. You get that same level by eating the steak or drinking the milk from this animal. And so you're like, well, that's fine, I like blueberries, I'll just eat the blueberries. But we can actually get plant secondary compounds that aren't in the blueberries. So like all of these sunflowers, they will have a certain plant secondary compound. Well, I don't find these sunflowers particularly palatable. So I can actually get the plant secondary compounds by eating the meat or the milk of the animal that ate the sunflowers. So It's kind of an interesting and really quite new area of study. But these two guys, Steve Klubine and Harry Cope, that had these, and they just sent off one stake. Diverse natives is what they were grazing when they were harvested. Those animals were harvested, and their levels were like well above the average grass-fed animal.
Did they taste better too?
I didn't eat one of the steaks, so don't know.
About that question, she was explaining that, and I was thinking, well, so does that mean when I get a drink of milk after the milk cow has been eating wild onions, am I getting a bunch of phytonutrients?
You sure are. That one tastes bad, but a lot of them don't. And I have to speak to that. Like, I have a dairy cow. I have not been milking her lately, but she will do really well on the diverse native grassland. We call it the prairie butter patch. And the milk tastes better than it does when I have her on fescue. It also lasts longer in the refrigerator. And so it's good stuff. Well, anything else you want to add to that, or you want to move to establishment, or any questions you guys have about that?
Take them back for ice cream, bathroom break, to establishment there.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Well, if nobody has burning questions, plan is, we've got ice cream back there. Sorry, it's Walmart special. There is probably no plant secondary compounds other than what alfalfa has in it, right? But it'll taste good, so you can get some calories.